HCD. We've also applied for a second round of funding, the LEAP grant, which we're waiting to hear back on. This will provide an additional $60,000 in funding for this effort. The key goals of both planning efforts are to streamline housing approvals, facilitate affordable housing, and accelerate housing production within the city. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jean Iceberg, our project consultant. She'll give you the agenda overview for tonight and walk you through tonight's discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Anne. Again, this is Jean Iceberg with Lexington Planning. I'm joined again tonight by Jane Lynn with Urban Field Studio. And we have a special guest tonight who's Christine Furstenberg, who's a real estate expert and consultant and a retail broker, commercial broker. And she's going to be focused on the land use commercial issues. So I hope you'll have lots of questions for her. So as Anne said, 3 topics tonight: project boundaries, the nodes and overlays, and land use related to residential and commercial specifically. As mentioned in the staff report, staff is starting to take a look at, or more closer look at, social equity implications, racial equity implications in planning projects. And so we've done that in the staff report, and we'll continue to look at that through the planning process. And as we're going through this, we've got the policy options at the back of the staff report listed there, and we'll repeat them in the presentation. And then we have a set of discussion questions on the first page of the staff report if you want to take some notes as we are going through this. So our big land use question tonight is really about how we strike the balance between residential versus commercial requirements in the plan. As Anne mentioned, the plan is really focused on housing issues. That's the purpose of the SB2 grant, but we know that this is historically a commercial corridor in San Pablo. And commercial development has effects on the city's tax revenues, has effects on sense of place, on a community's access to neighborhood retail. And so it's a really important part of the bigger picture. At the same time, we expect that a lot of residential development is going to come by replacing ground floor existing one-story commercial buildings. So we want to think about the implications of that on the plan as a whole. As Anne mentioned, when we met in July, we were really focused on density issues, height issues, transitions, and parking. This slide and the staff report summarize the feedback that we got from the commission, as well as from the community, who were very focused on alternative transportation modes, particularly bike parking, interest in exploring more about the local density bonus idea, some concerns about shadow impacts, height impacts, and interest in supporting pedestrians on the ground floor. So just recapping where we've come and where we are now, we've had those 3 meetings, as Anne mentioned, over the summer and into today, into the fall. And then we're going to be working, hopefully using that LEAP grant to do some more robust community online forum to try to access a broader range of community members during the COVID era, since we can't meet in person. And then we'll be drafting up components of the specific plan, working on the infrastructure plan, the CEQA analysis, the environmental review, and then coming back to you with those materials, ideally this winter. I'm going to pass this along to Jane for our next topic.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jane Lynn. I'm a consultant with Urban Field Studio. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about social equity and inclusion, and what that really means for the specific plan is that we talk about issues of housing affordability, because this relates to public health, racial justice, and economic justice. And really what we're going to look at a little bit is about the makeup of the types of housing in our just in a minute, but the median home price in Albany is over $1 million, which means that it is really unaffordable for workforce and middle income households. And so to make it possible to be more inclusive and to address housing affordability, the solution really is to build more multifamily development where feasible. So that really gives more people more options in places to live that are close to public transit and other kinds of conveniences. In this next slide, That's the one. This one is a map that was developed by the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley, and this is from a report about racial segregation in the Bay Area. And here they really highlighted in pink single-family residential zoning and highlighted other residential zoning in the light blue. And what you can see is that 69% of Albany is single-family residential zoning. And actually there are cities that range all in the Bay Area with different ranges. And when you look at San Pablo Avenue corridor, the corridor in particular, 54% of that stock it represents 54% of that housing stock. So it's really important to consider where multifamily housing could be placed, and also consider how this balances with the single family housing in the city. Next, please. So this just gives you an idea of who is included and what's going on with housing. The average number of people per household is declining, and it has been doing so for many years. And there are many reasons why people would need a different option other than single family housing, including downsizing, perhaps the family makeup changes. There are single family households. There are people who are just moving into their first place. There's graduates, and there are teachers, middle income people that all need opportunities for housing. And as we see, the space could be accommodated with multifamily housing. Next slide, please. There are many ways to promote affordability and inclusivity, and in our plan, we're considering these 5. Require a portion of new units to be affordable at below market rates, acquire or use city-owned properties to develop affordable housing, allow and encourage a range of housing types, and encourage ownership versus rental housing. And of course, as part of the plan, we are trying our best to reach out to different stakeholders given our circumstances. What we are trying to do is really make our outreach as wide as possible, and really do as much as we can in this virtual world that we're living in right now. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the plan area boundaries, and what our plan area really includes is outlined in blue here, and just wanted to quickly note that there's some diagonal hashing where there's University Village, and that's really state-owned. So local land use regulations do not apply here, but really trying to show and illustrate what is included, which parcels are included within this plan boundaries. And the quarter-mile radius is not necessarily a boundary, but just gives you a sense of scale. And within a quarter mile, it's a pretty nice walking distance. So that's why it's put on there, and to suggest, and we'll be talking a lot more about nodes and walking from really important intersections. So next, we'll talk about land use, and I'm passing this back to Jeannie.
Okay, thank you. So we've done some initial GIS mapping to see what's out there. You can see here Canes and Adams, the yellow parcels. You have primarily lower density residential uses, and then a real bric-a-brac set of uses on San Pablo in the pinks and maroons, where we've got a range of different types of commercial development. In terms of the split, we have really the vast majority of units on the left here in the corridor are multifamily units, and primarily with more than 5 units. And then we do have some single family homes, again, primarily fronting Canes and Adams. The commercial split is also somewhat divided, about 55% retail and restaurants, a quarter office, medical, and other commercial uses, and then 21% auto-oriented uses, which includes auto sales, auto repair, car washes. So a range of different use types. As we've talked about before, the way it is right now, the SPC zoning district fronting San Pablo requires ground floor commercial development along the entire corridor. The upper stories could be either commercial or residential. as a result, we've got retail spread out along San Pablo. In the pre-COVID era, there was very little vacancy. And so to some extent, we could say that maybe this is the right amount of retail, considering the uses and types of buildings that are there. But as we're thinking about the future and redevelopment, we may have some different visions for how retail unfolds. One more sort of wrench in the plan is that things have changed in terms of how the city is going to be doing the housing element going forward. We're expecting to get that regional housing needs assessment number soon. And, to date, many of the sites in the inventory have been located on San Pablo in the SPC corridor and the SPC zone. And the issue now is that HCD, the Housing Community Development Department at the state, may no longer accept the sites zoned for mixed use. And the issue is that, again, these sites could build out as commercial only across 3 stories, and there's no guarantee that a site would be residential. So we may need to zone some sites for residential only, or at least the upper stories as residential. So we're going to shift gears onto the retail and commercial side, and I wanted to introduce Christine Furstenberg, who will be taking over the presentation from here. Oh, Christine, you are on mute.
Thank you, Jeannie. Good evening, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is Christine Furstenberg, and I'm with Retail Real Estate Resources, which is a retail development consulting company. I wanted to give you a little bit about my background. I have spent 30 years in the development and brokerage industry, focusing primarily on retail and mixed use. I also provide consulting to many cities within Northern California, focusing on retail revitalization and zoning. In addition, I currently sit as the Western Regional ICSC P3 representative, which P3 is the bridge between the public sector and the private sector with regard to retail development. I have represented both landlords and tenants in my career, ranging from large footprint tenants like Kohl's, Safeway, Andronico's Markets, Target, AMC Theaters, Walmart, and Costco, to small tenants like Cycle Bar, E-Fang, which is a boba tea tenant in Berkeley, Bishop's Barbershop, and Salons by JC. Next slide, please. We looked at the commercial market asking rents, both before COVID and after COVID in Albany. The asking rents were actually very similar, although we believe the contract rents, when those leases get inked, will likely be much lower once we have enough deals to reflect a certain trend. On the slide, you can see what the asking rents were before COVID. I searched out and looked in September this month for asking rents, and on San Pablo, the retail asking rents were $1.85 to $2.10 per square foot per month. On Solano Avenue, those same the retail asking rents were $2.75 to $3.57 per square foot per month. With regard to office, on San Pablo, the asking rents were $1.41 to $3.50 per square foot per month, and Solano Avenue had $3.50 to $4.80 per square foot per month asking rents for office. You can see that both office and retail rents are more expensive along Solano Avenue. And that's because Solano Avenue has a stellar reputation among retailers and restaurants. The tenants seem to do higher sales along Solano Avenue, and that's why it's in such demand from retailers and restaurants. It is a regional shopping destination, and it does bring shoppers in from different surrounding cities. Next slide, please. We've broken down tenant types into size categories so that you can see what types of tenants go into what size of spaces. And this is actually very important to understand zoning and some of the things that you may want to look at with regard to zoning. Shop tenants 0 to 3,000 square feet. That's typically what you see along San Pablo Avenue right now. You do have some larger tenants. I've identified medium-sized tenants as 6 to 8,000 to 15,000. Pet Food Express, Trader Joe's, those are good examples of medium size. Large tenants, 15,000 to 40,000 square feet. Again, I've moved that 30 to 40 on the larger size tenants because 40 seems to be a really sweet spot for grocery stores. Office Max runs about 18,000. Ross is about 30,000. And then your extra large tenants, which would run from 50,000 to 150,000, and examples are Target, Costco, and Home Depot. Next slide, please. Before I get into classes of retail spaces, the categories, the size categories are more strict than you might imagine. A retailer will spend millions of dollars to find a way to maximize their profits within a certain size space. That size becomes the Bible for them until they spend $1 million or more to redo that size. So yes, tenant sizes are reducing some, but the tenants are not flexible at all. Once they've identified their proper sizing, that's the sizing that they will negotiate on. And it is a very strict negotiation point during lease negotiations. I'm sorry, next slide, please. Classes of retail spaces. This slide is actually somewhat self-explanatory and likely makes logical sense. Newer, updated spaces typically rent for more money. And where you see this logic differ is when a space is so well located that it stays leased at a higher price even when the property hasn't been physically updated. Next slide, please. When we talk about mixed use, it brings up many different visions for people. If you are a residential developer and a city were asking you for a mixed use project, that is typically the least preferred thing that you would want to build. A residential developer makes their money by building residential units. Adding additional types of uses to the project creates complications, and complications typically cost money. Complications like access, circulation, and different parking requirements are already challenging with a residential only project, but when you add in a different use like retail, it makes it much more complicated. In the Bay Area, when cities have actually blanketed areas with mixed use zoning, just painted a brush and said this whole area of the city will be mixed use without proper design specifications along with that mixed use. What's resulted were residential projects that oftentimes had unleasable retail shop space on the ground floor. The retail shop space normally had minimal depths as it needed to fit within the residential configurations of the units above, and that's due to the column spacing. The larger and more leasable retail configurations typically don't get built because if a space on the ground floor is larger or deeper than the residential units above the ground floor, it causes a residential developer to lose efficiencies, and typically they lose unit count. Loss of unit count makes the development less profitable. So again, that's why you don't see it unless indeed it's baked into your zoning code. Next screen, please. I mentioned how complicated mixed use buildings can be earlier. And what adds to the complication is the competition for the ground floor space from those uses typically that you would include in a residential building, like the residential lobby, the residential loading, and visitor parking. When you try and squeeze retail shop space into this mix, it sometimes makes the shop space nearly impossible to add on certain small parcels. Next slide, please. As you probably know, a retailer locates a store in a trade area to make a living. It's their livelihood. In our retail industry, we have standards and criteria that many retailers use when deciding on locations for their stores. It could be a store, a restaurant, or a salon fitness unit when I say retailer. One of the top criteria seen in about 90% of the retailer criteria, and this is retailer, restaurant, salon, fitness, is to be located at the intersection of two main thoroughfares. When you locate within a shopping center, this equates to locating on the end of a building or an end cap. This location criteria gives the retailer the maximum visibility to the customer and typically allows for ease of access. Most national and regional retailers will not locate mid-block. Next slide, please. I want to read the first phrase that we have here. Retail spaces shrink with mixed use. The redevelopment of underutilized one-story commercial spaces will result in smaller retail spaces. I think that phrase is very confusing. And so instead of trying to explain it with a lot of words, I just thought I would give you an example of what this means and why. Because again, I think it just doesn't make sense for many people. So let's assume that we were going to look at a redevelopment on the BevMo parcel. That's located at 836 San Pablo Avenue. BevMo, the building itself is 15,000 square feet. The adjacent parking parcel is 12,500 square feet. The combination of parcels, which are under one ownership, is 27,500 square feet, which is actually a pretty good size for a redevelopment. Typically, a residential developer would try and fit the highest number of housing units onto the site, including the required parking and circulation for the residential units. Adding commercial on the ground floor typically only takes away from the space that could be used for other residential units or for residential amenities. We're seeing a lot of residential amenities now, which could include gyms or other items. If the developer were to replace the 15,000 square feet that we take away of BevMo with another 15,000 square foot in a box configuration, the same configuration as BevMo, they could lose up to 20% of the planned residential units, both from a loss of efficiencies of the unit layouts and from providing the needed retail parking. That's why typically you'll see a replacement of the 15,000 square feet, if indeed they replace all of the square footage, with smaller shop spaces so that those shop spaces can fit nicely into the residential layouts above. Next slide, please. Increasing density is upzoning. Upzoning adds value to the land, but you have to go vertical to realize that value. For example, a one-story, 20,000 square foot piece of land with a 20,000 square foot retail building on it cannot produce the same income as a 20,000 square foot piece of land with 4 stories of residential units on it. Once a property is owned mixed use in the Bay Area, it basically prices out retail. Now you're probably asking, why can't the residential builder build 20,000 square feet, a 20,000 square foot retail box under the residential units? And yes, it physically can be built, like the example I mentioned earlier, but the developer loses efficiencies and the overall development will not be as profitable. And in today's world, with construction costs as expensive as they are, profitability becomes a really major discussion point. That's why we floated the idea of keeping retail-only zoning on some of the parcels. The idea is controversial. Please let me, it is very controversial. But in the long run, it can provide assurances that your community will always have retail areas for essential uses like grocery stores. An alternative idea is to require replacement of the actual like-kind retail space in a mixed-use development. So they would build the actual 15,000 square foot in the box configuration. Next slide, please. If you build it, will they come? Boy, that is the question of today, and really more so with COVID. Typically, retailers have very specific physical items built into the inside of their buildings. These specific physical requirements help them maximize the sales out of each location like their goal is. When a residential developer builds out retail space, it's often built out not with specific requirements, but built out generally, and they hope to lease it to any specific retailer. Oftentimes, though, building out the interior of a retail space after the shell is built can cost more money than starting from scratch. Utilities and their locations within the premises are critical to certain types of food retailers. And moving utility lines can cost tens of thousands of dollars and many months, especially with PG&E and bankruptcy. Now and continuing through next year, we will have vacancies. We will have those occurring basically from the spaces left vacant from retailers that can no longer afford to stay open. How much retail to zone for right now is one of the most challenging questions you can ask yourself. We hope to help you answer that question with new ideas for the specific plan along San Pablo. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jeannie.
Christine, I'm going to take over, and thank you so much for your perspective on the retail. What I'm going to bring next is more of an urban design perspective on the nodes and talking a little bit about overlays. So thinking about clusters of retail and things like that, we wanted to start to talk about nodes. So what is a node? And coming from a city planning background, the definition by Kevin Lynch of a node in his book, Image of the City, is that it's the focus of the city, neighborhood, or district, and that it includes things like landmarks, paths, and public spaces, and that this node is in some way unique and also intensifies the character around it. And so I just wanted to inject this because this is one of the things I think when you imagine what's going on San Pablo Avenue, there's many different nodes that could be part of it. So what happens there? Is it more unique? Is it taller? Does it have something special about it? Why is it the focus of this district? How does it focus activity and gathering? Does it mean it's retail? Is that the main thing that defines the node? Is there a landmark there? Is there a special reason to be there? These are all things that we should consider in where placement of different kinds of land uses go. On the next slide, what we see out there as nodes along San Pablo Avenue, they're all defined by anchors, and the anchors are places where customers typically wander about 2 blocks to get to and from, and they might be a grocery store, a theater, a popular shop, or bowling alley, or an intersection, or any kind of parking resource. So what happens is that stores typically cluster near each other to form a commercial node, and there may be other kinds of nodes as well. Next slide shows what the general plan defines as a major activity node, and in our zoning it becomes an overlay, and that's where it's appropriate for higher volumes of pedestrian activity. This is really important just to hold in your mind as what the difference is with the nodes and what's between them. It may permit additional building height or incentivize ground floor uses that create active street life. So we're assuming that might be retail or other active kinds of uses. And that these nodes are priority areas for investment in transit, streetscape, public art, all of those wonderful things that make it unique. So, and of course, it really does help our sense of place. So that's what the general plan says. And on the next slide, it just shows that we are looking at a couple really, these are the nodes, actually, these are the overlays that are currently existing. So there's from left to right, there's a residential commercial transition district, there's planned residential commercial overlay district, and a commercial node overlay district. When we look at all of these together, we kind of see a common theme of mixed use of residential and commercial, and thinking about how these overlays could be used. I'm going to hand that over to Jeannie, who will talk about some of our options.
Okay, thank you. So as we're wrapping up, summarizing what we heard from Christine, we have a number of options and recommendations. First, allowing ground floor commercial anywhere on the district instead of requiring it. Second, just requiring ground floor commercial in a few specific locations, namely on the corners fronting San Pablo and at the existing or potentially modified nodes. So again, the general plans identified nodes on the north end of the corridor and at the Solano intersection. Third, considering creating residential only zoning, or at least prohibiting upper story commercial, and again, in specific locations between the nodes and in mid-block locations. Fourth, considering commercial only zoning on the corners to preserve land values and to maintain some of the large footprint retail development. As Christine explained, yes, this is a controversial idea because it does potentially keep those land values where they are as opposed to participating in the upside of upzoning, but does allow us to maintain those larger footprint commercial uses, which add to the city's tax revenues. So what this could look like is, again, these circles are representing where the existing nodes are as defined by the general plan. But again, those are really aspirational nodes. There's no requirements in the general plan for what actually happens in those locations. The little red boxes are showing the corners where potentially ground floor retail could be required. And then the areas between the nodes are potential locations for residential only sites, or where where ground floor commercial may be allowed but is not required. Continuing with our options, number 5 is the idea of requiring replacement of existing large-scale retail in kind. So for example, if you have a 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 square foot retail space right now, that you would be required to replace that on the ground floor with a redevelopment. And 6, related to that, could we create an incentive for maintaining or rebuilding that use by allowing more housing or building height when that additional commercial area is provided. And then 7 is we're thinking about revising the design guidelines for San Pablo and adding design standards. If we do allow residential on the ground floor, what does that look like? Should residential units space San Pablo on the ground floor? Thinking about potential privacy impacts to those units, or can we allow the lobbies or shared community spaces such as a gym on that front facade? And so here's some examples of that. On the Belmont Village project, the residential garage comes out right up to the street, but has some screening in the form of these panels. The lower right-hand example showing some residential stoops that are landscaped and slightly up from the grade so that there's some additional privacy for the ground floor unit. So I mentioned we have a series of discussion questions on the first page of the staff report. I'll run through them quickly here. I know there's a lot to discuss, but hopefully we can try to get through all of them. On the economic equity and racial equity and diversity side of things, we offered some potential ideas for affordable housing, but we're looking to ask you also about how and where the plan can encourage diversity in the housing types and encourage affordable housing, how the planning process can make sure that it includes an array of stakeholders, and overall how the plan can support racial and economic diversity and equity. In terms of the planning boundaries, again, here we're looking for your confirmation that we're including generally the areas between Kames and Adams from city boundary to city boundary. On the land use side, in terms of this striking the balance between residential commercial, if you're supportive of places which should be residential only versus commercial only, what can happen on the ground floor if it is a residential only building. And we're looking for your input on some ideas about replacement of existing ground floor commercial. And then lastly, in terms of the nodes, should we use the general plan designated nodes as a starting point? Again, these are really aspirational qualities that are described in the general plan. There are no standards associated with the zoning overlays in the zoning ordinance. So again, it's just more intent language as opposed to specific regulations. So we're looking to you to let us know if those are good starting points for us to do further work. And then lastly, what kinds of features you would like to see at the nodes. Is it the types of uses or public gathering spaces? Is it additional density or height? So that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions before comment and discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, everyone. Why don't we, since I know there's going to be a lot of comments here, first we'll open it up for questions from commissioners to staff, and then we'll go ahead and open up for public comment and then turn it back to commissioner ideas and suggestions. So with that, do any commissioners have any questions for any of the consultants or staff? Commissioner Kent.
Yeah, there was mentioned that a lot of retailers prefer the corner spots. That might work in a more suburban, looser community, but in Albany, that seems to be the real struggle corner. If you look at San Pablo and Solano, those four corners, there's absolutely very little, no parking because of the busy corners. So those retailers really struggle. Is that a different equation in Albany than it would be in other cities? I mean, is there a desire to be on the corner and, for instance, on San Pablo and Solano?
What I'm gathering, that's for me, so I'll...
Yeah, I'm throwing that to you, Chris.
Okay, no problem. The one thing that I can say about retail is that we try to set rules to it, and there is always the exceptions, because retail, it's always about place, location, and the sales volume. So a retailer, a national retailer would look at those corners, and that would be their first choice because it's at a corner. Then they would analyze the parking. And if indeed there wasn't good parking or accessible parking accommodated on those corners, then they would say, I pass on this particular site. But again, what I was trying to explain is that it's a general criteria that when you get a retailer, an employee from a retailer, and they're looking for sites, they have this list of things that they need to check off. And being on the corner is one of their lists. So again, it's hard to say this doesn't apply, this does apply, but that's how a retailer would look at it. And what I believe my job is to make certain that you and any public official just understand how the retailer sees the world. It's oftentimes you won't agree with it, and oftentimes I don't agree with it. But if I'm representing a retailer, whether I agree with it or not, I have to follow what their criteria is set at. So that's how they would see it. They would look.
Okay. So let me think this one more thing then. So yeah, I agree. That's probably the general equation. But in this case, we know that doesn't work here. Same as San Pablo and University have very difficult corners. So there must be some other. So that's just something we have to worry about. If we designate this as kind of a retail node, we have to understand that there then will need to be parking as part of that equation. It sounds like
retailers do need parking. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
If I can just do a quick follow-up on that, I'm just wondering if any, again, this is for Christine, any of your sort of the studies that you've done on this or your experience, if there's a difference between what you've referred to as sort of the national retailers or more of the chain stores versus the more local mom and pops, who maybe don't have the same needs and demands for parking. They've got different locational criteria. And just wondering what sort of the data is telling us between those two demographics.
Thank you so much for that question, Commissioner. There's a big difference. And what we try to do is with mixed use projects, we try to make certain that they can accommodate the maximum number of retailers. So if indeed, let's use this example, the corner of San Pablo and Solano. If indeed, as the corner exists today, there isn't the proper parking, then it's possible that an independent retailer would accept that parking, whereas a regional or national retailer wouldn't. So what is important though, is especially in the world that we're going to enter into where retail is, the amount of retail will be shrinking. You want to make certain that if you're building a new building, you want to you want to have the entire pool of retailers be able to access that space. You want to be able to lease it to anybody, not just maybe 10 or 20%. So the independent retailers make up probably 20% of a typical retail pool. And the national regional retailers, and a regional retailer could be someone who's only in the Bay Area, but it's a regional retailer, sometimes more than 11 units. So again, regional and national typically are about 80% of the retailers, and the mom and pops are about 20%. But we're going through such a massive change right now that I can come back in 5 years and I think all the rules are going to be different. So it couldn't be more complicated. But again, the independent may go into that different space, whereas the national wouldn't.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Jennings, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just had a process-related question because we did get a couple of comments or questions about it, and just to help frame up the expectations for members of the audience. I know, Jeannie, I believe it was you touched briefly on what the community engagement is going to look like on this process from here on out. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, what efforts are being made and are going to continue to be made to ensure that, the community gets to have input into this process.
Sure. So, right now, this has been our community forum, has been through the Planning Commission. And so we want to broaden that and do a more community-wide forum. And our idea right now is to have a platform that's up for about 4 to 6 weeks that community members can interact on their own time to an online resource that allows them to look at what's been done so far, what the policy direction is, and provide comments on that, and whether it's in the form of a survey or something that they can see what other people have said that hasn't been determined yet. But that would happen sometime this fall or winter, sort of depending. Anne alluded to the city seeking another grant opportunity, and so it's somewhat related to the timing of that.
Thank you.
Great, Commissioner Donaldson.
Yeah, thanks, Megan, for that. And I'm sorry, I wanted to go back to Chris's comment as well. And I thought that was really a good thought, Chris, a good comment. I have watched over decades now where the San Pablo Solano corner has been our node. I've seen the 1997 plan, design review plan. It's been in 2 general plans. It would be great if in part of this process, we might be able to put some of your expertise on the ground to look at what is wrong with that corner and why we can't make it into a node. What are the constraints? Why has it failed so much? Is it the small parcel sizes? Is it the profitability of the liquor store? Is it the constraints of the billboard on the corner? Is it the strange configuration of Montero's? I don't know, but nothing's happened there. And I would really love to see something more specific from an appropriately qualified expert come into this about how we can make that node work. And as an aside comment, I'll say that when we did the UC Village thing and the Belmont commercial development there, I never thought any of that would fill up based on what I saw along San Pablo Avenue. I thought those buildings would be vacant for years. And then they filled up right away. Why is that? Was that because of the parking? They are not even on San Pablo, they're on a side street. Was it because of the UC Village demographics that were driving that? I don't know. But that was a commercial thing that I didn't think would work and did work. And the node at Solano and San Pablo has never worked. And I would love to see it stay a node, but I sure would even more love to see it work. Thank you.
Commissioner, I'd be happy to go through it and actually list for you why it may not work. And why the University Village worked is, number one, it has an anchor that's a very desirable anchor. And number two, the spaces were built to accommodate retailers and their criteria. And if you look at the tenant mix that you have at University Village, you'll find that you do have more national tenants in there than you might along San Pablo Avenue. Yeah. And it's because it's built to that criteria standard. And what we're trying to do, what ICSU is trying to do around the whole Bay Area, is to get mixed use developers to build to more of a retail standard, because it will lease. Albany is a desirable area for retailers. Yeah. Retailers want to be here. People can make a living doing retail in Albany. You have wonderful demographics. You have a wonderful community. But again, many of the spaces along San Pablo are physically obsolete.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other, Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, I just have a few questions. When we're talking about commercial space, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to ever build office buildings for the next 10, 15 years, maybe. So when we're talking about commercial space, it's strictly retail or some sort of service-oriented space. And therefore, it would probably be single story. Is that most likely? I don't.
Actually,
is there any other option there? I mean, there's sort of a rhythm to a streetscape and to good urban space. And it generally means fairly uniform heights all along a street in a district. So when you get this up and down and low rise, mid rise, it tends not to be, interrupted by parking lots. It tends not to be great urban space. So I'm just wondering.
Actually, there are wonderful examples of projects, mixed use projects, that if they're designed properly, they lease well, and you can have that nice balance of local retailers and national and regional retailers. It's all about design, and it absolutely can be done. You can have an entire area of mixed use with retail in the proper nodes to make the residential successful and to make the retail successful. It's really about design and how to lay everything out.
It seems like you're saying there's some sort of mid-sized retailers that should be included in that, that we're not really going to be successful if it's all just small storefronts. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I personally believe it deep in my heart, and here's why. Working with cities and seeing some of the mistakes that were made over the last 10 years. And one of your cities just a little south to you made a big mistake in putting every single commercial city mixed use. Well, so much of it got built and the commercial never got leased out. So there's examples of where you should be building the proper square footage of retail and how you can accommodate your essential uses. I absolutely believe that people shouldn't have to drive 20 minutes to do grocery shopping. I believe that you should accommodate grocers within your own community so a customer doesn't have to drive to a neighboring community. That adds to the traffic and it takes away from your own sales tax. There are not grocers that will fit in the shop space sizes. You might get a small market like a convenience store, but you won't get grocery unless you accommodate the depths. And that's where really thinking about how you zone it and the language that you put in the zoning is so critical. You should want those mid-sized retailers along San Pablo Avenue, because one mid-sized retailer can actually create more sales tax for you than probably 10 of the small shop spaces. So again, it just behooves a city to have a combination of both.
Commissioner Donaldson, question?
Okay, yeah, thanks. This is an interesting discussion. In the general plan, it calls for mixed use along the San Pablo corridor. And I guess the assumption I've had that goes along with that is, well, we're going to have commercial on the ground floor everywhere, and then residential above it. I think one of the questions that's been brought up today and in the staff report is, should we allow commercial on the upper floors? And I'd be in favor of saying no to that question anyway. And I think that's in front of the commission, one of the questions we had in front of us. And what you're saying to me, and what I hear, is that we may want to have some buildings, to allow some buildings that are residential only in the mid-block areas in particular. The arguments I've heard in the past, and we've talked about in our own commission meetings, has been, well, if you do that, you create a dead space with residential storefronts don't have any commercial activity there. They're residential buildings. And you have to deal with the problems of having a dead sidewalk, not much traffic, not much pedestrian traffic there, and the problems of well, that's the main one. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. And sometimes access problems as well. But what you're telling me is that we should look at having we could have a mixed use that would have some buildings that do in fact have commercial on the down, or residential on the ground level. And then someone raised a question earlier about how about the privacy of those residential units, and how is that done? Those are additional questions I have as I'm listening to your advocacy for mixed use, not on each individual parcel, but on the corridor as a whole. So,
are there any other questions before we open it up for public comment, and then we'll circle back for comments?
Okay,
That's fine. Yeah, we can move on.
Okay, great. Staff, can we go ahead and open it up then for public comment?
Yes. Members of the public, please use the raise your hand feature. If you're calling by phone, you can press *9 if you would like to speak. You'll be given 3 minutes, and afterwards we'll meet you and call the next speaker. First speaker up is Ed Fields. Ed Fields, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Good evening. I live on the west side of Keynes Avenue. On my block, there are 18 housing units, including 6 single-family homes, 4 of which are rented. 9 more townhomes are planned. There will be 27 units of 1, 2, and 3-story housing on 1 1/4 acre of land. We live on this block because it was more affordable than R1 neighborhoods in Albany. This specific plan process is invalid because it doesn't conform to the zoning requirements in the general plan, which a specific plan must do. You focus on one policy for transforming the San Pablo Avenue corridor and decided that that means 6 or 8-story buildings. What about other policies like, quote, ensuring that infill development in residential areas is compatible in density, scale, and character with the established neighborhood context, or in areas designated for high and medium density residential uses, ensure that new development is designed to minimize sharp contrasts in height, prevent the loss of sunlight and privacy for adjacent homes. If these words from the general plan could have any racial inference, that is not my intention. My neighborhood is racially and economically diverse, and I want to maintain that diversity. Note that the townhome project recently approved is 3 stories, and the proposed Evelyn Avenue apartments are 4 stories, nothing like the huge building shown in attachment 2. In the staff report is attachment 3, figure 1, which was shown by the consultant's residential zoning in Albany. That's from a recent study showing the correlation between racially segregated neighborhoods and areas zoned for single-family homes in the Bay Area. Albany has 69% of its residential land zoned R1. Without UC Village, the number would be closer to 80%. Measure D, passed in 1978, wasn't just about parking. It downzoned an area of the city to single family. If you want to redo the general plan land use element, think about including single family zoning in Albany. Think about eliminating single family zoning in Albany, as some other cities are doing. Time and again, the city comes up with a plan, hires consultants to provide the justification for it. Once the plan is ready for approval, you notify the neighbors about a public hearing. So far, there's been very little outreach to the neighbors and the public. I support increasing affordable housing, not enriching developers. I want to support anti-racist policies. I don't want to be a NIMBY. But you are talking about drastically changing the zoning for our house and our San Pablo backyard. Thank you.
Okay. Next speaker we have is Susan Schwartz. Susan, you have 3 minutes starting now. Susan, you can speak.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. My name is Susan Schwartz. I'm the head of Friends of Five Creeks. Some of you know that for more than 20 years, we have worked on natural areas in Albany, particularly Codornices and Cerrito Creek. We would like to talk about what we see is missing from this plan. There's no mention, whatever, of green space, access to the outdoors, fresh air, nature, or exercise, aside from encouraging pedestrian or orientation. The general plan says that Albany should be a leader, not just in equity of housing, but promoting public health and wellness. I think that whatever emerges from our current shutdown, you should consider the flexibility that you may need to face a very different, both housing and commercial situation. To be an economic success, this plan may have to deal with these issues of fresh air, exercise. How are people going to shop? It may not look like what would have been envisioned a year ago. And in terms of equity, these people will not have the single family yards. They will not have the large open areas that are available to the large condos on Albany Hill. That's the vast majority of your population. How will you accommodate them? Now, we're not saying that you need to hire a bunch more consultants or slow down this process. We feel that affordable housing is very important. Our letters, which you have, list a large number of low-cost alternatives. Can you expand the community garden plots available to apartments like the ones at Ocean View or somewhere else? How can you promise that these houses will be able to use the school play areas after hours, or the large fields that are set aside for team sports? The people who live in these houses, maybe they're not going to be participating in those team sports, and we don't even know the future of these team sports. We may need much larger areas for people to just be outdoors. We've certainly seen this on Codornices Creek. Simply, you have this wonderful opportunity on both Codornices and Cerrito to have marvelous green corridors. Please include these. It's not expensive. Anybody who knows Albany can list these opportunities and include them in your plan. Thank you so much.
Okay, next speaker is Nico Nagel. You have 3 minutes to speak starting now.
Hi there, my name is Nico Nagel. I'm here on behalf of the Bay Area Housing Advocacy Coalition. We're a 20-year-old housing nonprofit based out of San Francisco, recently taken our mission of creating enough homes for all our folks to live in, Bay Area wide. And so I believe this is my organization's first time in Albany, so I appreciate you welcoming me. Yeah, so we submitted a longer letter earlier in the week, and so our full comment will be laid out in there. I imagine everyone has it, but for my comments tonight, I really just want to say that there is regional importance to this project and to this specific plan, and the reason being that the context for this project is an immense housing shortage, and a housing shortage that across the region has driven a climate crisis. I think the past few weeks have shown what continuous inability to create enough homes for folks in the Bay Area has done to commutes and therefore has done to our climate. The other thing I'll say is the ability just to deliver homes is massively important. People live in homes; they don't live in entitlements, and creating false homes on paper. The consultant's memo noted that building to heights of 6 to 8 stories is simply where there's feasibility in the market, where homes can be delivered, where folks can move in and new neighbors can find a place to live in Albany. That's really all I have to say tonight. I'm in support of upzoning to that 6 to 8 story level, and I hope folks are will be welcoming to their new neighbors. I appreciate it.
Okay. Next speaker, Nick Peterson, you have 3 minutes to speak starting now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Nick Peterson. I'm a almost 30-year resident of Albany, a lifetime resident of the Bay Area. I also serve on the Climate Action Committee and advise the City Council on our attempts to mitigate climate change in Albany. So again, this is a really complex issue, and I am very sympathetic with people who are worried about how this will be implemented. But again, I think this is a change we need to embrace if we do it right. And I think it needs a lot of careful thought. We're moving away from it being an automobile-dominated culture and looking more back to our cities. I mean, we fled the cities for a long time and we're a suburban culture, and now we're
lost you, Nick.
Okay, I guess Nick got disconnected. Nick, you can come back and speak if need be. Next speaker we have is Clay Larson. You have 3 minutes starting now.
Hope you can hear me. I wrote a letter this morning. I sent an email this morning. It's the same message I've sent previously. I think the basic premise of the specific plan is, which is the realization of some, or the implementation of some goal that exists in the general plan, is preposterous. It is incompetent at best, dishonest at worst. I think what we're talking about here is a change in the general plan, a significant change in the general plan. I think that should proceed by a public process, very similar to the process that you embark upon when you create a general plan. And I don't think now is the time to do it. I don't think we can accommodate that level of public participation. I spent some time this weekend reading Albany's current general plan. I was impressed by how thoughtful it was. For example, on page 1 of the land use element, the plan notes generally that land use changes have the potential to make Albany more vibrant, economically healthy, and sustainable, but then immediately cautions, but without proper direction and coordinated public investment, change can also be adverse. Later on page 19 of that same section, the plan notes that most of the city's future residential and mixed-use development opportunities are located along San Pablo Avenue, but then immediately cautions that sensitive transitions to lower density development east and west of the avenue is critical. The general plan goes on to describe various measures, setbacks, and daylight planes for buffering the effects of development along San Pablo and the neighboring streets. I think the consultant's approach is much less thoughtful. The consultant proposes to eliminate the quote unquote complicated daylight plane requirements, noting that they reduce the number of units that can be constructed. The consultant also proposes to reduce or eliminate parking and open space requirements for the same reason. So while the current general plan is thoughtful, the consultant's proposals seem single-minded and thoughtless. The goal here should be not to absolutely maximize infill development on San Pablo Avenue, but we need to try to provide opportunities for housing that meet our RENA numbers. We should also consider ways to distribute the RENA throughout the city. We should be considering ways to produce housing that are affordable. We need to change the direction of the current plan. Seriously, I still have 38 seconds left. I'm impressed that we're kicking the snot out of mixed use development here. I mean, for years, that's been the golden child of city planners. Now suddenly we discover it's complicated, it doesn't produce appropriate retail space, and developers are too stupid to figure out how to build it. So that makes you think twice about believing anything planners say. I would be curious to hear, I don't have enough time, so that'll conclude my 8 seconds left. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, next speaker, Christina Finnegan. You have 3 minutes to speak, starting now.
Great. Hi, I'm Christina Finnegan, and I am an Albany resident, and I also teach in Albany. And I live in an apartment just 1 block off of San Pablo. And I would like to let you know that it was very difficult to find this apartment in Albany in my price range. And I am really excited about the idea that there might be more apartments and retail. I don't own a car, and I love living in Albany where it's walkable. I would love for it to be more walkable and have more retail and more opportunities for me to not need to hop on a bus or get on BART, which are also great along San Pablo. I have a lot of friends in my demographic that would love to live here, but can't. And so I'm really excited about this plan, and I would love to hear more. I'm excited about more input from the public, and I will certainly be continuing to give you my input. So thank you for doing all this hard work.
Okay, sorry. Next speaker, we have Nick Peterson again. We'll allow you to speak again. Nick, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the bad connection there and a little bit of technology problems. Yeah, I just wanted to say, the Albany Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, of course, emphasizes having more active transportation, having more less use of cars, more use of pedestrian, and having more pedestrian intensive development and housing. So we, to some degree, we support this. Again, it's a change. It's a change from what has been there for years and years, and we're moving into urban design that involves dense living situation that is probably more than norm in other parts of the world where their development was prior to the complete takeover by automobiles. So we need to be thoughtful on this. I really am excited about this process. I'm very supportive of it. I think there are certain areas in Albany that do make sense for having the density. I understand if someone lives next to those, they're probably in disagreement with that, but there are ways to implement it that can be sensitive and also thoughtful and well-designed. So I support moving forward and trying to look at increased densities and buildings that work the same way that they do in places in Europe, where they live with higher densities and fewer cars and more pedestrian-oriented places. It's all possible. We need to learn these things, and I encourage you to pursue them. Thank you very much.
Okay, next speaker we have is David Arkin. David, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Great. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, everyone. I'm really pleased that you're studying the San Pablo Avenue corridor and possibly revisiting our zoning along it. I participated in the prior round of zoning ordinance modifications, and subsequently as a planning commissioner, had a chance to review the few projects that came through. I also chaired the N1 Measure N1 committee that eliminated the parking ratios, mandated 2 parking units per dwelling unit. That was mandated by Measure D, and had a hope that that was going to result in a boom of residential and mixed use development along San Pablo Avenue. That hasn't happened, and I continue to wonder why that is. And I'm urging this committee and our consultants to really explore the question, why is this not happening in Albany? Is it because the parcels are small relative to what can be aggregated in neighboring cities, or that it's difficult and expensive to aggregate parcels to a point where you can actually develop them economically? Is it the shallow depth? They're only 100 feet deep, and that the zoning changes at the back of that parcel, and it's difficult to bring parking into a building from the Keynes or Adams. And I should say, I live on Stanage Avenue, which with a home that backs up onto the backside of Keynes Avenue. So this is very close to where I live, and yet I really support our efforts to build housing, meet our regional housing obligations, and really create a vibrant urban streetscape experience on San Pablo Avenue. So I just urge you all to ask the questions, why is this not happening specifically here? Is it our zoning ordinance, or are there other factors at work that we might want to look at? So thank you very much.
Okay, I see 2 more speakers. The next speaker is Preston Jordan. Preston, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Hi there, thank you very much. And it's good to follow the previous speaker, because that was exactly a point I was going to make. To my knowledge, there have been no projects that have been applied for permits on San Pablo or Solano since the off-street parking requirement reductions were put into place in early 2017, if my understanding is correct, following the remanding of those requirements control back to the city council in the election of 2016. So whatever changes were made were not enough. And I agree, trying to understand why they're not enough seems key. But keeping things the way they are doesn't seem like it would provide any different result than what has occurred in the last 3 years. So either Albany needs to make a change if it does want more housing generation along San Pablo and also Solano, or it needs to admit that it does not want that change. I'll read a clip from The Economist. And again, I want to stress this is The Economist magazine. This is an article, the title of which is "Segregation Still Blights the Lives of African Americans." And zoning rules which keep the cost of housing high by restricting supply make it very hard for poor Black families to move to better neighborhoods. As income inequality has risen, well-to-do families have bid up the price of homes near good schools, further concentrating poverty. Public housing programs which should break up these patterns do little. This is an article about how integration is found to be one of the best solutions to restoring economic mobility to America. America right now has lower economic or class mobility than does Britain, which is pretty astounding. So I encourage you to look at what hasn't been working and try to understand why it hasn't been working and do something different, try something different. Thank you very much.
Okay, next speaker is Brian Martin. Brian, you have 3 minutes starting now.
The Shift Command A to unmute. I'm a resident on the 600 block of Adams Street. I live on the east side of Adams Street, the San Pablo Ave side. We own the duplex here that we live in, and we rent out the upstairs unit. Both units currently have great valuable views of the East Bay Hills and get lots of sun for gardens and outdoor quality of life. We have established trees that thrive in the sunshine. We have recently invested over $100,000 into an ADU in the backyard. It's almost complete. In this way, we're investing in the neighborhood, and we will have this extra cottage that, because of its small size, will be a more affordable place to rent for the right person who wants a sunny yard, views of the East Bay Hills, etc. So I'm aware of the regional problems with the housing shortage. I believe that Albany should do its part to help relieve that housing pressure. I believe there's already a lot of market housing in Albany. The entire stock of existing condos, apartments, duplexes, triplexes, and single-family homes. The city has almost no low-income housing and needs more. I support the proposed development on Cleveland and Washington. I advocated that the proposed Pierce Street Albany Hill development not be luxury homes, but be low-income, high density, to keep it off the upper part of the hill and to make it more affordable for people. I support the city's and state's changes to encourage infill housing, like the ADU we are completing, and I think this should be expanded. The city's proposed solution to focus almost exclusively on San Pablo Avenue to relieve the housing pressure, I think, is unsound and heightens disparities between the east and west sides of town. All the current city council members happen to live east of the BART tracks. Their decisions and yours, I don't know where you all live, but their decisions and yours affect everyone in the city. But here they far and away impact residents on Adams and Keynes in the poorer west side of town. If height limits are extended and requirements for daylight planes and setbacks are removed, then it will directly negatively impact my family and my neighborhood in a concrete, tangible way. These will directly hurt our finances as we try to rent out these places. To really build up, I'm concerned developers will need to build out. Will this city support this by taking over properties like mine by eminent domain? Did my family make a huge mistake by investing in the community with our ADU? To spread out the losses to current, why doesn't the city consider doing this for Solano Avenue? It has mass transit service. It's not far walk from BART. It has the 18 bus, and it has a commercial corridor with a lot of foot traffic that would benefit from higher density from residents. But of course, it passes through the more wealthy parts of town. I ask that you consider these issues as you decide what to do with San Pablo Avenue. Thank you.
Next speaker, Amy Smolens, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Hi, I live on.
Amy?
Yeah, sorry, unmute. You got me now?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. I live on Keynes Avenue, a block from San Pablo and half a block off Solano. I was lucky. I bought my house 30 years ago. I don't feel like it's my place to deny others like Christina's friends the right to live in Albany. We have a housing shortage. We need housing. One of the great things about living right here on the edge of a commercial district is that we can walk or bike to almost everything that we need. I agree with Susan's points previously about the outdoor space. I've been in some of the new El Cerrito developments, apartments, and they have outdoor green areas to accommodate residents, which is terrific. Glad to see that Albany may be following, or hopefully will be following, El Cerrito and Berkeley's leads by adding much needed residential units on the San Pablo corridor. We've only completed 175 units, which are all at Belmont Village, and there are 9 more are planned for 184 total. El Cerrito, with the number before in May, was almost 1,500 units. Berkeley, almost 600. Our entire region needs housing, and we've really got to do our part to help the crisis. We can't just say, oh, let our neighbors do it, north, south. Since your last meeting on this topic, we've been ravaged by fires. The whole West Coast has been ravaged by fires. No matter how they started, we all know that the spread was due to the dry conditions caused by climate change. This really underscores the need for us to do our part, help save the state, save our planet. 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions are due to motor vehicle emissions. So we've really got to figure out how to reduce motor vehicle dependence. Since San Pablo Avenue is a major regional AC transit corridor, it's blocked from El Cerrito Plaza BART, blocks from restaurants, services, retailers, and if there's mixed use, retailers will be downstairs. We really need to encourage car-free living. Charge lower rent, unbundle parking, charge lower rent to residents without pricey motor vehicle parking, require that they do not own a car in order to get that lower rent, have car share nodes, have bike share nodes, things like that. One Maryland developer actually gave every tenant a bicycle rather than provide car parking. There's lots of ways to reduce motor vehicle use, so I hope we do that. Denser housing and alternative transportations will really help us mitigate the housing shortage and reach our environmental goals. So thank you very much. San Pablo is the right place to start. Thanks.
Okay, last speaker I see, Veronica Davidson. You have 3 minutes starting now.
Me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So we are a business owner and property owners on San Pablo Avenue, and we've owned the property for about 7+ years now, and the business has been open, well, it's been open less time than it's been closed almost. And we've really seen some of the changes start along San Pablo Avenue, and I think we've recently backtracked due to COVID. We were really excited about the potential vibrancy along San Pablo Avenue. What I am noticing right now is more and more businesses having to utilize the outdoor spaces, and I would love to see us think forward towards that as we move on here. We have a beautiful climate and we can use that, and people strolling along our commercial districts will be drawn into businesses they might not otherwise frequent. So really focusing on having that storefront and street level inviting feeling where there's indoor and outdoor spaces for businesses. I was recently over in Richmond, and there's a beautiful new development where they have live work lofts, and the entire community has a nice parking lot area where the residents can open their garage doors, and some people actually sell goods and work right out of their downstairs garage. That would be a really interesting concept for us to think about along San Pablo Avenue for supporting some small businesses, but also adding in housing right there. I also think that I would love to see the opportunity for us to have a few bigger, more drawing retailers that we don't have to travel for. I have 2 children and we walk all the time, but I find that we are really lacking some of the businesses that we need to support basic needs in Albany, and we could create a more vibrant community, and then all of the other businesses surrounding those would see an increase in their traffic and their sales. We own the brewery, so we draw a huge crowd. We love being on San Pablo Avenue. We have a lot of neighbors from all of the side streets who come and visit us. I think the most important thing here is to make sure that San Pablo Avenue stays safe, stays inviting, and really encourages people to have an exchange at the storefronts along San Pablo Avenue. So thank you so much. I appreciate that you guys are looking into this so carefully. I would also just like to second that I think we could do more on Solano, and we could wrap it into San Pablo. Thanks so much.
Okay, there are no more speakers at the moment.
Great. Thank you, Chris. We'll go ahead then and close public comment, and we'll turn it back to the commissioners for deliberations and comments. Any commissioners want to start things off? Sure, Commissioner Jennings.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to start. And I know we only have about a half hour left on this meeting before we need to start our next meeting. So I do want to be respectful of the time limits, and we'll try to keep myself to 5 minutes. So please feel free to hold me accountable to that. I think, and I also, I want to bring the discussion back to the key points that the consultant team kind of set up. The main topics relating to, land use between commercial and residential, whether we're using these this node concept, and the boundaries. I think there are a lot of really important higher level policy considerations that that we've heard from various commenters about, and there's a lot of valid stuff to discuss there, but just in the interest of trying to focus comments on the particular discussion topics that were outlined in the staff report and presentation, that's where I'm going to try to focus my comments rather than revisiting some of those bigger questions about whether we're pursuing housing in this area or not, et cetera. So in terms of the nodes, oh, and I should say, I live on the west side of San Pablo. I'm about a block off of the edge of this new proposed district. So for whatever that's worth. I think there are a lot of creative ideas that the team outlined, and yes, very thoughtful ideas that the team outlined in terms of trying to optimize the balance between residential and commercial uses. I do support the idea of removing some of the prescriptive ground floor retail requirements along the entirety of the street. I do think it's really important that, in one form or another, we are finding a way to make that San Pablo and Solano intersection work. Agree with comments that others have already made that, for whatever reason, that intersection isn't really working from a retail perspective. But I think it's critical that we not give up on that. And I think it makes sense to have ground floor retail at certain nodes. I'm generally supportive of the idea of working from the ones that were outlined in the general plan. I would also suggest considering another type of node around San Pablo and Monroe. That, just being a way to capitalize on what is a successful retail development directly, on the west side of San Pablo. And, in terms of whether to require ground floor, commercial uses along the rest of the corridor, again, I would support moving away from that as a blanket requirement. I think that a lot of communities have moved towards more flexible ideas about what constitutes active uses, and having direct entrances to residences, like with stoops, like townhomes, etc., can be a good way to activate parts of the street. So I don't think it's a binary choice between having retail or having a dead space in the middle of the block. So I would encourage looking for flexibility around that. And in terms of whether to designate some parcels commercial only, it's an interesting idea, and I did appreciate hearing Christine's perspective on some of the challenges of developing different types of retail and what those tenants are looking for. I think, broadly speaking, I would be more interested in just moving away from being really prescriptive about what is going into, different parts of each block, and just allowing for more flexibility. So yeah, hopefully you can do something with that comment. But certainly, with an eye toward trying to promote density, being able to achieve our RENA goals, and being able to promote a mix of housing at a mix of levels of affordability that will ultimately help us with our diversity and inclusion goals. And it's great to focus, as some have, on increasing affordable housing. We do need to do that, but there's, in terms of the housing that's not only affordable to average people, but is actually below market rate, that is almost entirely made possible because of market rate housing subsidizing it. And so I do think that's important to keep in mind. So let's see. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Again, I know others have a lot of comments they want to share. But as we move forward, I do want to make sure that that we are focused on trying to find that right balance between commercial and residential uses. So appreciate a lot of these ideas that you guys are bringing to the table.
Thank you. Commissioner Donaldson.
Okay, yeah, I think it's a good idea. Thank you, Megan, and I'll try to be as brief as I can be too. I will turn to the staff report and try to talk about the questions for the commission. I'm going to skip over economic and racial diversity and come back to that last. I think the simple ones, planning area boundaries. I think that the planning area boundaries we've done for the study as it's proceeding are okay. Don't have any problem there. Land use, how does the plan strike the balance between supporting residential and commercial development? I think we're working on that. I think we do need to find a balance, and we do need both commercial and residential in the corridor. Should some parcels be zoned for residential only uses? My first answer to that when I read the staff report was no, I don't think so. I think it should be mixed use, parcel by parcel, based on the presentation today. As I said earlier, I'm willing to reconsider that, and maybe there is a case to be made for having some all residential parcels fronting on San Pablo, but I'm still somewhat skeptical about that. Should ground floor residential uses be permitted on San Pablo? Again, that's part of the same question. And I have had doubts about that in the past, but maybe you're right. Maybe it could work, and maybe it would be a good way to go. Let's see, should some parcels be zoned for commercial uses only? My first answer to that was no. Your example on the BevMo site would make me reconsider that a little bit. Again, it's a parcel by parcel thing. And in fact, it leads me to what's been a conundrum for me all the time is the parcel sizes along the San Pablo corridor, which are really probably the biggest, maybe the biggest constraint we have to redeveloping this whole area. So I think we have a big responsibility to look carefully at those larger parcels, the large parcels, and decide should they be residential or should they be commercial, and or should they be mixed use. There aren't very many of them, and that's where we're going to have our development if we have any. Should new mixed use development replace the same amount of commercial it takes away? I would say that depends. I would like to see the commercial uses focused in the node, in the main node, if that's feasible. I'd really like to see the Solano San Pablo node somehow become a nice, vibrant commercial corner. Nodes and overlays. I think that we really have one node, and that's San Pablo Solano. I think there's talk about a second one. The overlay districts, I haven't really restudied those. I'm familiar with them from the past. I think what we have is a node at Solano and San Pablo and a gateway at each creek, Cerrito Creek and Cardenisas Creek. And I think that would be the way we should look at this plan, to have a city gateway at either north and south ends with a major node in San Pablo, and maybe some sub nodes or something like that. Other places, I don't know. It's occurred to me that we kind of have a nighttime node with the 3 or 4 bars starting on Solano, and that we have a node of activity there on many, many nights. I know some people would think that's not very good, but I do notice that it does bring a lot of people, and it is kind of an activity center, and of regional fame or notoriety, I suppose. Anyway, let's see. What features would you like to see in the nodes? Public gathering spaces. I'm looking at, would think of a private public mix there, but yes, for sure, public gathering spaces. But this parcels are so small and everything that it's going to have to be a public private mix. And additional height and density, for sure, yes. I think so. So those are the questions you asked for, and those are my responses. Oh no, I want to go back to the first one, economic and racial diversity. This is a puzzling one, a hard one for me, and it's only come up tonight for the first time in this staff report, I think. The racial has anyway. I'm sure that we can't discriminate on housing. We can't say we want people of a certain race to come in any of our housing, and I don't think we're talking about that. We can't be. I don't know how the plan can support racial equity. I think it can support economic diversity by having a mix of units and by having more affordable units. Although that's even tough because we're dealing with new construction, which by definition is going to be more expensive than the older units we have right now. I mean, my initial thinking looking at this is, what are we going to do here? And I would say, take the money we're putting on this plan, the money we're all spending on this, the time of this, take it and put it into the housing choice plan, and let's get some housing vouchers out there so we can support existing people in our community. I don't think that could be done. I do think that housing vouchers are a great way to go to integrate the community wherever it is. So the old Section 8 program, now the Housing Choice Program, run by, it's a federal program. Alameda County administers it. I don't think they can take money from it, but if we added $160,000 to it, which is what this study is roughly costing, that we could put a lot of people, quite a few people, we could subsidize rent for quite a few people that need affordable rent. So that was my reaction when I saw that and read the staff report. And that I think that would be the better place to put this kind of money. That's where I am right now. And as far as San Pablo Avenue is concerned, removing the parking restrictions didn't work. I agree with David Arkin and other speakers on that. It hasn't really brought any development. I would say our next step should be to raise the height limit from 38 feet to 50 feet and see what happens. And I think with the density bonus we have, that'll add an extra floor on there, that we will get development. I think that would do it. I don't know, but I think that would do it. And that would be something we could do for a few $1,000s and a couple of planning and zoning and city council meetings. And we wouldn't need to do this study. So anyway, that's where I am. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Kent.
Okay, I guess I can weigh in. So a few things. The residential on the ground floor along San Pablo, possible. I haven't seen it done well in other stretches of San Pablo, especially in parts of El Cerrito and Richmond, where you have the residential right up against the street. It's dismal. If it was done, it'd have to be set back, and then you'd lose square footage. I can't see it being right up against the property line like you would have retail. So I am in preference of retail, even if it's not successful. It's it might be better than having a resident that has a window that has the blinds down all the time. It's just not a very pleasant street. We on these trying to make I jump around here a little bit, but trying to make a kind of economic diversity. We want more affordable housing in Albany, but that's by reducing the parking in order to take that expense off the developer, maybe eliminating the commercial in order to make a more efficient structure, reducing the setbacks, the light wells. All these things will give us a more efficient structure with more units, but that won't lower the cost because the cost, it's market rate, right? They're just going to charge whatever they can get for it. So you're going to get all the amenities out there and you're going to have the same price. So it's a real difficult thing. We can add amenities, force these build nice units, but they'll come at a higher cost. We can take out all the amenities that the cities might force on the developer, and we might get the same cost, maybe a little bit lower, but not significantly lower. And if we provide open space, if the city provides open space, well, the developer will then reflect that in the cost because they're adjacent to this city supplied open space. So it really comes out to the market. And I'm not sure if we want to give away all these gifts to the developer in exchange. Hopefully they'll drop, even though their construction cost might be cheaper. We're not sure if that's going to manifest itself in a cheaper unit. Residential, sorry, the height, I'm with Commissioner Donaldson on that. I'd like to go step by step on this. So I think 50 feet would be good too. I think 5 feet. That seems to be the equation in other cities. Berkeley and Oakland, 5 stories, 80 units on these larger lots seems to be pretty good size. Racial diversity, I thought also that was an odd thing to put in here because we can't really control that unless I'm missing something. I don't know if we can. We want to have a diversity of housing unit types. That I'm not sure if that can reflect itself in any kind of racial diversity, but it seems like a stretch. But definitely economic diversity. So I think creating a specific plan that encourages development will add more units, and that is really almost the best we can do. Final comments. Yeah, that's about it. And Susan Schwartz's comment about the open space, I agree. It'd be really nice to weave any new addition into the community, and that's usually done through open space where you do meet your neighbors. You don't meet them in their apartments. You meet them at either events or in the retail, but a lot of times on the street walking the dog. And so that's crucial to bring new housing into the community, is to provide these open space links. And that might be in an urban space like this, just wider sidewalks, allow setbacks. So there's a little more landscaping, a little softer, and encourages people to walk around and meet each other. Okay.
Commissioner McLeod, do you want to go for it?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, a lot of interesting ideas today, and a lot of things to think about, and a lot to digest in a way, and almost too much to just come up with. Obviously no one's coming up with all the answers even after 3 study sessions. So you're trying to focus the discussion a little bit today. The commercial build out idea, I'm really sensitive to the need for a variety of commercial spaces. I really want to, as a priority, create more housing and affordable housing, but I also want to have a vibrant street space that is lively, is pedestrian oriented, gets a lot of people on the street, walking distance to all the kinds of shops you would want. Like the consultant said, a market nearby. I mean, we do have markets at the ends. We have a market up on Solano, but there may be other businesses that would be key to making it a very, very walkable neighborhood. So I'm a little resistant to all residential or some residential only. I mean, they do create dead spaces. It happens on Solano. There are certain areas that are pretty lively, and then some areas that are pretty dead. I mean, maybe if those were just sort of a couple of mid-block sections between other nodes, as we've been calling them, that might be okay, residential only, but I think it's a difficult proposition. I do see these storefronts that are built out in other areas around the region, and they sit empty for a year, 2 years. You wonder what the heck is ever going to happen to it. And then boom, all of a sudden there's a great little cafe in there, or a restaurant, or some other boutique type store, and it becomes a great neighborhood center and a draw and creates more street life. I think that's what we're looking for, is some sort of balance of higher residential, more affordable, and a great street life. I don't think we want to create just a dormitory corridor where it still just stays as kind of a commuter corridor for people driving through. For me, nodes, it's more like a destination instead of a node, maybe. Creating a destination would be great. If that happens at a couple of key locations as a draw, that would be fine. So it's a complicated question how to structure it so you do get all the great kinds of commercial uses that you want. It sounds like it's a big challenge to get the bigger box type stores or like mid-sized retailers like BevMo under a residential construction, although I've seen it in San Francisco. There's a Whole Foods that's under a residential tower. Maybe it's a different kind of construction, I don't know, but it is possible. I've seen it. So, really having a lively streetscape is what is the key to making this a success. And in that way, I don't see this as a divider between the two sides of Albany. I see it as the meeting place for the two sides of Albany. I really think it's a divider right now. It's a huge divider. It's pretty unlively, pretty blank, uninviting for the most part. And we can only improve it, really. And then to sort of step back, it's kind of the major goals here. I think creating as much affordable housing and as much housing as we can, as many units as we can, I think is our goal, should be our goal. We're at kind of the confluence of so many crises, climate crisis, affordability and housing shortage, homelessness, even the COVID crisis. I think higher density, really building it out with as many units as we can is a solution to all these things. High rents and high construction costs. This is not a problem that gets solved by building the minimum and then hoping some people elsewhere build a little more. It's like a regional problem where every city has to build a lot and provide more supply so that the rents in the region will be lower. It's not a unique one thing in Albany will solve it. It's a regional problem. And if Albany doesn't do our part and then other cities don't do their part, then we're going to continue with high rents. Homelessness is basically an affordability problem. I think the lack of diversity, it's also an affordability and a smaller unit type problem. Albany's had a history of what you could call exclusionary zoning with single family zoning, very low zoning limits on San Pablo, which preclude any kind of building out of this area. So I think we improve our affordability and our diversity by getting more units and making them more available, and it's part of a regional solution. So I think we need to do our part in that, and I think that means trying to build as many units as we can. And I think we're going to be up against the wall in the near future with our housing element. And I think we'll be grateful that if we do put into place the ability to create a lot of units along San Pablo. And I don't think it's just San Pablo that should bear that burden, if you want to call it a burden. I think it will actually be a benefit to the city. It's economic development. It'll bring jobs. It'll bring more people, more shoppers, more people shopping locally. I think it's going to be a great boost for our city and for San Pablo Avenue. I think it's a great way to create future economic activity. And post-COVID, we are going to need that. Retail will come back. COVID is temporary. I don't think it's going to be, maybe another year, year and a half, and then things are going to rebound once we get a vaccine or some other kind of effective treatment. So, retail will come back and these other things will come back. But I think it's really paramount that we pretty aggressively try to create housing here. I was at our last meeting, we finished with a study of our housing element, and a huge percentage of those new units, or we're like almost 500,000 units short in the Bay Area. And a very big percentage of those units are mandated to be, when they're constructed, low income or very low income. And basically on the San Pablo corridor, we've done 1 unit in the last 5 years. So our track record is really bad. And I would really like to see us work hard to improve that. And part of that, I think, would be changing our inclusionary zoning ordinance, seeing if we can add more affordable units as a requirement. I was really struck that last time, I think one of the consultants said that the state density bonus law is almost never used to add affordable units, but just to make the projects easier for the developers. So if that's the case, and we're already quite requiring the minimum, and then they use the state density bonus law to just get rid of things they don't want, I think we should be asking for more, because we're not going to get more through the state density bonus law. I'm really concerned about, also the parking. I would like to see better parking modeling done for all different heights. I think the one that you did do, the consultants did do, it showed me that we should be limiting parking, because we do want to create space for other uses on the ground floor. Like our real estate consultant says, the ground floor has a lot of competing demands. And I think we need to eliminate some of the parking demands on that. I think there should be a maximum. I think we're on the verge of a paradigm shift in mobility. Automated cars are coming. Car share is going to change things drastically. And I think we ought to be redesigning San Pablo to be a continuous protected bike lane, so that people who get out of their apartments can just get on their bike and do their shopping by bike and access other areas. I also think the end of San Pablo, the north end, really could accommodate the highest development levels, because it is within walking distance of the BART station. So in the sense of transit-oriented development, I could see going 85 feet along those, that northern end. We have larger parcels there. I really think it could be a viable place to put higher density. I think we're going to need a lot more discussion and a lot more talk about all these things. It's complicated, some of the questions. So, I think we should be studying it quite a bit more. And I'm sorry I talked quite a while. I think we could extend our meeting. I don't see why we have to end at 7. We could go a few minutes over. We don't have a lot on our agenda, so I'm okay if we went another 10 or 20 minutes or something. If that's okay with our chair and staff. I don't know. All right, thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner McLeod. Well, I'll just jump in and share some of my comments and try to keep it brief here as well. So starting with some of the simpler questions that were posed to us in terms of the plan area boundaries, I agree with a lot of the comments my fellow commissioners said. In terms of Commissioner McLeod's comment about potentially having taller heights towards the northern boundary, I would agree that I think the sort of the land use and the geography can accommodate, parcel sizes can accommodate some larger heights, and we've got some larger sites there. So I think there might be a strong possibility for increased density there. On the southern boundary, I think there should certainly be some sort of gateway. I don't really have a strong idea quite yet of what that means, but I do think there's starting to become a bit of a critical mass there between the bakery that's down there and the shops on Monroe. I think there's an opportunity to kind of think through placemaking there. But again, the scale of the properties down there, I think, is also a bit different than on the northern end. And then really having that like celebratory node really be the Solano and San Pablo node. I do think to your the comments and questions about outreach moving forward, I actually think we should just talk to the property owners who own those 4 parcels on the corner of Solano and San Pablo. I don't know if that's already been done, if staff's already done that, or maybe, you know, the 4 plus sort of one additional interior lot. But I think there could be a whole variety of reasons. I think it could be, you know, what the rents are being asked, if there are any other, you know, term limitations in terms of the leasing terms. Like, I think it would just be a good opportunity to talk to them and see what the property owners see as the constraints and challenges to filling those sites. Again, with it being a small town, it might be just like an easier approach to talk directly. In terms of that San Pablo node, you know, I do think that when it comes to, or in terms of the nodes and the overlays and commercial and all of that, when it comes to commercial, I'm not a big proponent of dedicating any of the sites along San Pablo as commercial only or residential only, for a couple of reasons. One, from the residential only perspective, I completely agree that residential on the ground floor, I think, is really disruptive to San Pablo. And to me, this is not about the immediate conditions of San Pablo and what's desirable there. I think part of our responsibility is being, you know, forward looking, and what do we want San Pablo to be, not just for our current moment in time, but for future generations. You know, the built environment is sort of generational choices that we're making, not, you know, 5 to 10 year lease terms. And so to me, this is really about, this is an opportunity to think about how we want San Pablo to change if we're not happy with the way it is right now. And I would certainly be a proponent of looking at that change. And I don't think ground floor residential is the key to our success if we want it to be an active, lively place. You know, I certainly think that there can be some flexibility on corner sites to certainly have, you know, walk-up units that are accessed off of the side street. So it doesn't mean that residential cannot exist in some shape and form on the ground floor. To me, it's more about the commercial street frontage along San Pablo having at least some predominance of commercial activity on a parcel by parcel basis. You know, there's obviously moments where you need access to lobbies, you need access to other things if there is parking off of San Pablo. But I think the concept of having in every development some sort of retail is important. I'm also, though, a fan of sort of never saying never, and having some sort of venue, whether it's a major use permit or something like that, for on a case-by-case basis, kind of building in a safety net, if you will. There's a really unusual parcel, a really great architectural design where there might be a one-off where residential could make sense. I think we should have an avenue where somebody could ask for that, but that we have some really clear criteria tagged to it that kind of gets the vision that we're looking for on those. So that would be my general thought on that. And I think in terms of the commercial only and the replacement commercial, which I'm not a big proponent of, you know, I think the woman who spoke during public comment who owns one of the breweries on San Pablo, you know, is a perfect example. They own the building and they run their business. There's not a speculative risk there that that parcel is going to be acquired and redeveloped. They own it. They choose to continue operating their business. And I think in Albany, there are a handful of parcels that fall into that will continue to always be commercial because folks own the property. There's not a risk of the building being sold to a developer. You know, possibly one of the solutions, and you know, to me, I think it's on San Pablo, it's striking the balance between local small businesses, which I know, especially in the Solano district, we you know, put some controls into place to really incentivize local businesses. But on San Pablo, you know, maybe what we want to look at is in terms of development size, that developments of a certain size, you know, there's a finding that goes into place, or there's some sort of incentive to build out the shell for larger commercial tenants, so that there's a draw on, you know, if you're aggregating parcels, there's a draw for larger tenants to be able to go in there. I mean, I think Albany is in a very fortunate place in that we have a sort of a very high quantity of grocery stores readily available to us. I don't think we're in a food desert by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, it's probably quite the opposite. So I'm not sure the grocery store need is necessarily a need that our community has. I think we probably have a higher need for other types of uses, whether that's incentivizing new, I think retail medical is going to be something that we're going to see more and more of over the years. Things that we may not want on Solano, like dialysis clinics, but maybe there's a way to have those go into San Pablo. But again, I think around our gateways and around our nodes, the finer scale, smaller commercial spaces that don't need to occupy the whole ground floor, that just need to occupy sort of that smaller, more intimate space. It also brings down the price point. And I think, to me, smaller commercial tenants also do play into the sort of race and social equity conversation, and that they increase the likelihood of getting a first-time business owner who has an idea, who wants to open a space, and they have the ability to take the risk on a smaller space because the price points without parking end up inherently being more accessible. And I do think that, and I don't know if the rules in Albany have changed since I grew up here, but I do know that a lot of the kids that I went to school with that brought a lot of diversity into the school system were the kids of people's parents who had businesses in Albany. They might not have lived in Albany, but they were able to sort of avail themselves of Albany public schools because their parents were business owners. And so I do think there is a correlation there between sort of zoning regulations and the types of spaces and the types of commercial tenants that we're creating our zoning rules for, and what the community culture ends up being. I know we're over time here, so I'm going to try to be really just scroll through here really quickly on anything else. In terms of heights, I guess we're not really talking about heights today. I think we've kind of talked about that before, but certainly I think the other aspect of this is increasing heights along San Pablo. And really at the end of the day, to me, it's about density. And I don't know if we want to have unit mix requirements, but I do think there is something to be said of when you've got a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, you're inherently diversifying the demographics within your community. And I think our single family home stock is not the most diverse of housing stock. There's not a dramatic range in sizes and bedroom counts. You're kind of within a certain ballpark demographic that can both afford and sort of family sizes that occupy those homes. So I think by having higher density with a greater diversity of sort of bedroom counts, you're inherently going to diversify the pool of people who are able to move into Albany. I think you also likely increase the likelihood of rental housing. Even if the units themselves are condoed, I think a lot of people buy condo units as investment properties that they then subsequently rent out. So I don't think inherently a condo project and increasing rental units in a community are mutually exclusive things. Whereas I think that's a little less likely with single family home development. So I think all of that is to say that the greater we increase our density, I think all of those things do pull back to sort of a race and social equity lens as well. With that, I think I will wrap. We're now 6 minutes over our hearing. So I'll just pause right now and loop back with staff and commissioners if there are any final thoughts on this before we adjourn and jump back over into our regularly scheduled hearing. Nope, it's all quiet.
Yeah,
okay.
I think this was a really informative discussion, and thank all of you for offering a lot of feedback. This is really helpful for us.
Okay, great. Well, then with that, why don't we go ahead and adjourn our special study session, and why don't we take it's 7:06 right now. Why don't we take a 4-minute break and we'll rejoin at 7:10. I know Commissioner Kent, you gotta make a move here. So we'll rejoin at 7:10 for folks listening in on the public. Meeting's adjourned.
All right, it looks like we are all back. So we will go ahead and call our regularly scheduled meeting, a little bit late here, but our regularly scheduled meeting of 7 o'clock to order. Staff, if we can go to item number 2, roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Donaldson? Commissioner Jennings? Commissioner Kent? Commissioner McLeod?
Here.
And Chair Waddy.
Present. Thank you. Next up on our agenda, item number 3, ex parte communications. Do any commissioners have any ex parte communications to disclose?
No.
Seeing none, then we will move on to item 4 on our agenda, which is the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted on by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission, and there will be no separate discussion or public comment unless a commission member or member of the audience wishes to remove the item from consent. Why don't we first open it? Oh,
just a quick announcement about the consent calendar. Just for the record, Commissioner Waddy contacted me regarding 910 Tulare and an amendment to a possible window on the front facade. So I contacted the applicant and they were willing to do it in an effort to keep the item on consent calendar. And so that that amendment will take place. The windows will also have the 3D true mullions on the exterior of the glazing as well.
And will be wood or an aluminum clad instead of vinyl.
Correct.
Great.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Great. So with that amendment to that project scope, do any commissioners wish to remove any of the other consent items off of the consent calendar? No? Okay. Seeing none, why don't we go ahead and open it up for public comment? Is there anyone from the public who wishes to remove any of these items from the consent calendar?
I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay, great. With that, then, do we have a motion on the consent calendar?
Sure. I'll move approval of the consent calendar, which includes the minutes from July 22nd, the project conditional use permit at 910 Tulare as just modified a few seconds ago, 521 Curtis Street, the design review and parking reduction there, and new second story deck at 1016 Peralta Avenue. 3 projects.
Do we have a second on that motion?
I can second.
Okay, great. With that second, we'll just go through with a full roll call vote here. So Commissioner McLeod.
Aye.
Commissioner Kent.
Aye.
Commissioner Jennings.
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson.
Aye. Mm-hmm.
And I also vote aye on the consent calendar. So the consent calendar items pass 5-0. And I don't believe any of these had any story polls up, given the scopes. So just a reminder that there is a 14-day appeal period for all of those items. That takes us on to item 5 on our agenda, which is general public comment. Public comment is for persons wishing to address the commission on an item that is not otherwise on the agenda, and each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any folks sitting in general public comment?
One moment.
It looks like Jeremiah, perhaps?
Yes, Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you can now speak.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Good evening. So basically, there's a lot going on with this planning and zoning, right? We still don't have school zones. You know, we have no reduced speed around our schools. And gosh, luckily, I mean, in a way, these kids aren't actually going to our physical schools because these streets are crazy right now. Solano, such a dodge. And how do you cross a crosswalk at the post office without getting hit by a car? And, you know, the sad part is that everybody, you know, drives way too fast down Solano. And you got this thing put on by the Solano Avenue Association, and it's like, I don't see the police do any traffic calming. Solano Avenue, at the top of Solano, there's that state California law in the middle of the crosswalk up by Zachary's Pizza. So I don't see why we can't get those in our area, right in the middle of the crosswalk, right? So school zones is a must, and traffic calming on Solano is a must. I mean, I don't know what's going on with your guys' agendas, but I've suggested this school zone thing for over 10 years now. And I don't know who to talk to, who to finally agree with me saying that I'm doing the right thing, because all these city council meetings, you guys, everybody's talking about other cities. El Cerrito's doing this, Berkeley's doing that. Well, Berkeley has school zones. Every other city has school zones in the municipal code book, except for Albany. It's so sad. We're supposed to be the #1 school district in like California, and it's just so unsafe. I mean, it's like Albany doesn't care about safety because they took the word safety out of the Transportation and Safe Committee. The word safety is not even in there anymore. Safety is supposed to come first. And I said, hey, if you guys are going to rename the committee, name it Safety and Traffic, because safety does come first. It's like nobody cares. And we already had a pedestrian last year get run over by a paratransit bus on Lower Solano. So what's it going to take before someone gets run over trying to do their post office? Is it going to take another death before you guys to put up a $100 sign to slow down on Solano? Please, everybody, wake up and
Great. Thanks for the public comment. And just before we move on, just Jeremiah, for your sake, since you show up at all of our hearings, just wanted to reiterate to you that although the Planning and Zoning Commission has the word zone in it, we have jurisdiction over development that happens on private property, so not the sidewalks and streets. The city's Transportation Commission, their mission is to focus on design of city-owned rights-of-way. So the streets are within their jurisdiction, not the Planning and Zoning Commission. So just don't want you to think that your statements are falling on deaf ears. It's just not our jurisdiction to be focusing on what happens on the public streets. So just wanted to get that on the record for everyone. All right, so with that, is there any other, it looks like there are no other hands raised in public comment. So with that, we'll go ahead and close public comment. And we'll move on to item 6 on our regular agenda, which is discussion and possible action. The one item we have is item 6-1. This is planning application 20-029, design review for a new rooftop deck at 511 Carmel Avenue. Staff?
Yes, thank you. I'll give a brief presentation on this project, and then I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. Once again, this is planning application 20-029, design review for a new roof deck at 511 Carmel Avenue. Some background on the property. The subject property is a 3,750 square foot lot with an existing 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,555 square foot home built in 1926. City records show the following work done to the property: a single-story rear addition measuring 13 by 16 feet back in 1975, detached accessory structure, a re-roof, and interior remodeling in 2016. Here's a street view of the property as it looks today. Project request. The applicant is seeking design review approval for a new rooftop deck at 511 Carmel. The project scope includes a new 257 square foot deck over an existing flat roof area at the rear of the home. With the deck comes, the applicant is proposing a spiral staircase for access, a canvas sunshade for shading, horizontal metal guardrails with cedar board, and a matching skirt to match the existing cladding material on the home. Potted vegetation screening around the interior perimeter of the deck. The project scope is limited to the exterior of the structure only. Here is an elevation of the existing rear of the home. And here's a proposed elevation with the spiral staircase and proposed deck including the sunshade above. And then lastly, here is also the proposed site plan showing the setbacks from the adjacent property lines. Parking, off-street parking is provided in the existing driveway. No expansion of the home is proposed under this project scope, and thus there are no additional parking requirements triggered with this project scope. Staff has received one letter of correspondence from the adjacent neighbor citing privacy concerns with the proposed project. The letter was included as part of an attachment to the staff report. The project designer also provided a response letter that was forwarded to the commission after the packet went out. Both of these correspondences have been added to the public record. The project is categorically exempt from CEQA review. And recommendation, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and approve the proposed project subject to the findings and conditions of approval. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris. Are there any questions for staff before we open it up to the project sponsor for a presentation? Commissioner Jennings.
Yeah, just real quick. Chris, I know that in the comment letter, at least the first comment letter that was submitted by the neighbor, I think there was mention about both the setback from the rear property line and the building height, or not the building height, but the height of the top of the sunshade structure. I just wanted to confirm, is it staff's view that this proposal conforms to both the setback requirements and the maximum height for this zoning district?
Yeah. Correct. It complies with all the setback requirements, including the heights.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
And then could I just
Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, just to make sure, absolutely sure, the spiral staircase is allowed in the setback zone partially, right?
Correct. There are, the zoning code does allow encroachment of certain architectural features, and decks in general are also allowed to permit a maximum of up to 6 feet into the required rear setback area.
Okay, thank you.
I did also have one other question, more just curious on why this is referred to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Is this just sort of discretionary, or is there something in the municipal code that says second story decks shall be referred to the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I think typically in our past, whenever we have a roof deck that's above grade significantly, we just automatically take it to the Planning and Zoning Commission due to privacy concerns that we anticipate, which was the case in this project as well. So the Community Development Director has the discretion to refer any project to the commission, and that's what we've done in this position too.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, basically anytime there's a roof deck, we by default take it to the commission just because it does get into these height and privacy issues. And obviously judging from the correspondence received, there are some concerns from adjacent neighbors. So we thought it most appropriate to bring this to the commission for a hearing rather than a consent calendar item.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from commissioners? All right, not seeing any. Why don't we go ahead and open it up to the project applicant for a brief presentation, if you have one.
Andrew Sullivan, if you would want to speak on your project, you may speak now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for considering this. I have the architect here as well, so if there are any specific questions about the, design elements, he's on the line. The basic driver for this is we have what's not shown on the diagrams here is the neighbor who actually filed the complaint has a second story building to the east of us, which has a window looking down into our yard and blocks sunlight. And there's a large tree, very large tree that is kind of right at that south eastern corner. So only in the peak hours of summer do we receive sunlight in this area. And once we hit this, actually right now, there's not sunlight striking the patio, what's called the patio there. So, and particularly in winter and fall, there's just not a lot of sunlight back there. And so our kids and us have casually been hanging out on the on the roof, and our kids' friends have been hanging out on the roof. So we kind of realized it's a desirable space to be for a lot of different reasons, and we wanted to make it safe as well. And I also feel that kind of Albany has a real opportunity in some ways to use space a little more creatively, because they are small homes, and we've kind of tried to make the most of our space here. So it's also very interesting, for us from how do you optimize the limited space we have in our home. We don't want to move into big. We love Albany. We want to be here, but we also want to create small spaces in different environments that create different experiences and allow for different kinds of interaction at our home. Particularly now, obviously with COVID, where there's been a lot of home time, this has been a really valuable kind of sought after space for us. So anyway, we started the project and engaged BOA architects to work with the city to make sure we were doing everything right and doing it in an interesting way, and also working with our neighbors to address their concerns. And what's interesting is that our neighbors to the north have very different concerns than the neighbors to the east. The neighbors to the east are concerned about privacy, whereas the neighbors to the north are concerned about sunlight. So they want open space. They wanted cables. They wanted sunlight to be able to pass through, and they wanted no obstruction. So we're really trying to balance, the fact that, one, we do not want to look into our neighbor's backyard. That is not the goal of this project. So we really try to come up with a creative way to let sunlight move through the railings, and at the same time create both an effective and artistic visual barrier for the eastern side of the railing, right? So and be architecturally unified with the clear cedar siding that exists in the entire backyard. So the entire backyard and half of the home is lined in clear cedar siding, and so BOA designed a barrier that is kind of solid through the center part of the eastern side, and then slowly starts to disintegrate as you reach the edges of the northern and southern side of the eastern wall, and then completely disintegrates really to allow sunlight to pass through into Treve and Joanne's garden in the northern side. So we did engage our neighbors, and we did ask for feedback, and we did accommodate, as much as we felt we could, and we're still open to feedback. If there's if everybody thinks there's some problem with this, but we felt we did a pretty good job of creating both a physical barrier, but keeping it architecturally unified, aesthetically kind of interesting, and then enabling or allowing for kind of a green shade to extend beyond the railing to further create a barrier to the eastern neighbor as well.
Okay, thank you. I also see that the project architect, Edward Buchanan, has his hand raised. Chair, would you like to allow him to speak?
Yes, go ahead. If we can keep it to 2 minutes, though, maybe we'll reduce time since it's sponsor time.
Okay. Edward, you have 2 minutes and you may speak.
Hear me now? Okay. Everybody hear me? I'm Edward Buchanan, the architect, and Andrew, I think, stole my whole presentation. He did a very good job of explaining the balance that we tried to achieve with this project, because it's really an existing roof deck, and the design is about the railing and how do we use the railing that balances transparency where we need it, opaqueness where we need it, and yet not be something that's so tall that would definitely preserve privacy to the east, but in doing so would be a very looming presence, not just over the Sullivan's backyard, but would also be a permanent obstruction, casting shadows to the neighbors to the north. So I don't think there's really much more I can add. Andrew did a very good job of explaining the materials and the design intent with that. And I think I'd just like to say that this is a design that is 9 feet fully 9 feet below the allowed height limit. It meets all the setbacks, and I think it's a very aesthetically pleasing and functional design. And I'm very happy to answer more questions if needed.
I have a question.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Yeah, sure. On the site plan on the along the back of your lot, the eastern and northern side, there's a row of plants there that are shown. Do you know what those are and how tall they are? I could see them from the street. They do looks like they do some view blocking, but are they still young? Are they going to grow taller? Do you have any comments on that? I'd really like to know more about that row of plants back there.
I don't,
Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, I don't know the exact height of the plants, but they were planted as part of the 2009 remodel, and I believe they've reached their maximum height, at this point, and they do provide, I think, a shade of perhaps, I don't know, 2 feet above the deck, which is the code. So whatever that height would be, but we're not trimming the tops and they're not growing.
Okay.
So they do provide, an adequate shade while you're at ground level in the patio. Okay. But you can still, if you see the design, there's when you leave the back addition there's kind of a series of stairs that take you down to the patio level. When you're standing at the top level, you can still look straight into the neighbor's back window from that level. So they don't shield the view from our kitchens.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for the applicant before we open it up for public comment? Okay, seeing none, then why don't we go ahead and open it up to public comment?
Okay, I see we have 2 speakers. The first is Deborah DeMont. Deborah, you have 3 minutes to speak. You may speak now.
Sorry, I think I was muted. I'm the backyard neighbor. We share a fence with the 511 Carmel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And we're not trying to stop them from building the roof deck. We are, however, requesting modifications. They can look directly onto our porch, kitchen, and into the backyard from the roof at 511 Carmel. The guardrail on our side is at a height of 42 inches, and we'd like to request that there be a solid guardrail or privacy screen that's higher in the range of 60 to 72 inches at the rear. If the side neighbors are concerned about the height, then they can leave the guardrail lower on those sides to prevent shading. I would also like to request that hardscape structures be used for the purposes of preserving privacy. Plants at the property line are about 8 feet tall, even though the plans that we saw said they were 20 feet tall. And Andrew is saying that they've reached their maximum height. They currently have plants on the roof that are brown and are in bad condition. They don't look lush, and do not resemble the drawings in the architect's drawing. And we would like to request that at minimum, if these are being used as part of the privacy screen, that the size and colors of the planters and the exact plants, a plant list should be detailed in the design. Access is something of an issue. The access currently is a spiral staircase that was described, which is in the rear setback. Currently, there's 23 feet between us and our neighbors, and now that they're using their roof as a deck, informal deck, they feel like they're very close since they can look directly into our kitchen. The staircase and landing that are currently proposed don't offer any privacy to neighbors. They have been large, late social gatherings at the home previously, and we're somewhat concerned about the noise of a metal staircase and want to minimize any future problems. The metal staircase itself will likely create more noise, including people walking up or banging on the stairs. The stairs are allowed. We would request that there be additional privacy screening at the rear and possibly on the side of the stairs, which is allowed by statute. Even if they are in the setback, they can be screened on two sides. I disagree with the architect that the stairs and landing don't represent any privacy concerns. Is anyone standing on the stairs or landing and given the proposed proximity to our house can see into the kitchen? I would state that we spoke to the project's architect, but I don't see that there were any changes made in response to our concerns. If you do agree to external deck access, I would like them to move the staircase to the south side or.
Time's up. We have one more speaker, actually two more speakers, Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes to speak. You may speak now.
Yeah, possibly, yeah, move the staircase in another location, something that's, you know, more private. Looks like the staircase possibly might be able to be moved. A few point of interest I had was a fire extinguisher. If this gets approved, you know, you got to have a fire extinguisher up there because I foresee this thing being a barbecue pit hangout. You know, you got an outdoor barbecue pit. They're grilling, whatever they want to grill on their grill. They got fire going up there, a propane tank, you know, that's dangerous. So if you're going to do that, you got to have a fire extinguisher installed on the deck right there. That's in the backyard. It's hard for a fire department to put out a fire in someone's backyard. And that quickly spreads to other people's properties. I'm not sure if there's special insurance for this kind of deck, if the homeowner needs to have special property insurance for a high risk fall, having all those kids, having all these children running up and down stairs. I mean, kids, they don't even know to not chase a ball rolling in the middle of the street. They'll just run out there and go grab the ball and get hit by a car. I mean, kids don't have a lot of common sense, but I do see that noise issue, right? Those metal stairs, they could be going up there at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, running up and down those stairs. Yeah. And what are those stairs made out of? Is it a slip, trip and fall hazard? When it's going to be winter, it's going to be raining real soon. So are those stairs have slip preventative things? And also during this construction, there's going to be a lot of sawdust, right? Cutting all that wood, a lot of sawdust floating in the air, landing on neighbors' properties. So who's going to be cleaning and sweeping up that sawdust on the neighbor's yard and grass? And what kind of stain are you going to be using? You know, is it good for the environment? Who's going to be doing this labor? Are you going to have the kids doing physical labor? Because, you know, it's kind of wrong having kids try to help build your deck, you know? So a lot of checks and balances, really take note of the neighbors, because the community we live in, you got to keep neighbors happy. You know, if the neighbors aren't happy, nobody's happy. And that's the town we live in Albany. It's very community oriented. And if anything like this, it's got to go green. If you're taking up room on the roof, where are you going to put solar panels? You know, so where's the 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan for this residence? Are they going to incorporate green energy uses? Are they going to incorporate all the right stuff? So thank you.
Okay, I see one more speaker, John Garfield. John, you have 3 minutes. You may speak now. John, do you wish to speak?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, okay, excuse that. Okay, thank you. Good evening. With Deborah DeMott, I'm also in the house directly to the rear of the applicant's house. So first I'd like to say that the proposed sunshade does obstruct views, potentially creates shadowing, looks like an imposition on neighbors. I'll get back to that, and seems to be unnecessary. The architect is saying it won't be open most of the time, which seems to suggest it's even more unnecessary. We don't know how it opens or closes. Nothing like that is specified. Freestanding umbrellas could be used. A large umbrella is decked, not imposed. A large sunshade, which is proposed, elevated by iron pipes to a height that's above the highest point of the house itself, and has a very unusual design. That kind of structure is indeed incongruous with a 1920s built home, and it would be visible from all sides. It will partially block our views and our neighbors' views of the sky and the skyline. I think this has already come up, but please request a lighting plan for the deck and anything else having to do with electrical features. At present, there is a string of lights up at that deck area. We live in a very quiet neighborhood. There's little traffic, BART's pretty far away, dogs and kids, make some noise, not too much, but never late at night. One exception, I must say, are parties. There have been loud gatherings at 511 Carmel in the backyard with music. And with the addition of this deck, seems fairly certain that party goers will be coming up and down the deck. Again, with issues of noise and privacy. I did speak very recently, last few days, with a couple of neighbors that I just bumped into from different houses. And they say they only received cards and really had no discussion. And then when they found out more about the project, they actually voiced very similar concerns to those concerns that Deborah and I are putting out there, namely privacy, noise, and...
Okay, time's up. There are no more public speakers that I see.
Okay, great. With that, then we will go ahead and close. Oh, do you want me to close public comment first, or do you have a question before?
I wanted to ask John a question. It's kind of awkward being they probably signed up, but
sure, go ahead, Commissioner
how far away is his kitchen from his back, from the fence?
How far? Mr. Garfield, it looks like you may be on mute. If you'd like to unmute yourself to answer Commissioner Kent's question, if you're still available.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
I was asking the distance of your house or the kitchen to the back fence.
I don't know. I really don't know. It's not that far.
Commissioner Kent, I happen to go through our Laserfiche historic records on this property, and I was able to locate the site plan from the addition that was referenced. And it appears that there's a 25-foot setback from their house to the rear property line.
To the neighbor's house, and 25
to the
feet.
common property line. So the subject property shows approximately a 20-foot setback. Of course, there's the stair encroachment, and then the neighbors behind on the San Carlos side, their historic plans show a 25-foot setback to the rear property line.
Okay, I measured on Google Map, looked closer, it looked 15 feet. Okay, all right. Okay, so that looks like it's 45 feet difference. Thanks.
Okay, great. With that, then we'll go ahead and close public comment, and we'll turn it back to commissioners for deliberation. Is there anyone who'd like to start discussion?
I can start, I guess.
Okay, sure.
Oh, I could.
Did
Mm-hmm.
you wave your hand? Sorry, I didn't see it.
I was muted, so whatever. If you want to go ahead, that's fine. Mm-hmm.
All right. So, a few practical concerns. One is, I think there's the eave of the house that's right there at the head level when you're on the deck, and that's looked like kind of a little bit of something has to be done architecturally. You should not crash constantly walking into that.
And there's very easy access to the other part of the roof from the deck. Looks like only 2-foot step, and then you're on the roof to go higher up. And it looked a little bit unsafe with kids. It's such an easy climb to the rest of the roof. So maybe something could be added to help protect that. And a third element, these probably more treated in the during the construction document phase, but the window too going up needs to be tempered glass, I believe. Or not up, or next to the deck, there's a window to one of the rooms, and it's down probably 6 inches above the top of the deck. That would have to be replaced with tempered glass window. So those sorts of issues, I think, haven't really been addressed in this plan. The other one was, I thought the idea for it was to provide for sun, because the backyard is in deep shade, and then we're putting a sunshade over it. So maybe the idea is you need both sun and shade, and I can understand and respect that. But I thought that was odd that we're trying to get sun and then we're putting a sunshade over it. Those are some practical issues I had. I do think they're well within their right to build this. It's probably less of an imposition on the neighbors than if they built a second story, which they're fully right to do. So I think this would probably be used less than a bedroom, which could be placed up there. Also, I think the privacy could be easily addressed through landscaping. And you asked that question I was having, Doug, about what that plant was. And since it's maxed out at around, what I gather, 10 feet, probably won't work, but you could put a better species on the other side of the fence that might go up to 20 feet or 15 feet. And I have several suggestions if they want them. Or replace that hedge. Take out 2 or 3 of the shrubs and plant something taller in there to start to, I mean, that's an easy landscape fix. And that's it seems like that would solve a lot of problems so that both could get what they would like. As far as the noise, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I think people are, as long as they're not making more noise than they're really allowed to under the code, they should be able to use their site and try to be somewhat respectful to the neighbors. So that's a balancing act that will have to be addressed by the neighbors themselves.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Okay. Yeah, so this comes to us, design review. There's no conditional use permit required. I haven't really gone through the design review guidelines in detail with this project in front of me, but I don't think it has any qualities to it that go against our design review guides. At least I certainly can't think of any. And it would be pretty much invisible from the street, from the main front of the house. So it's really a backyard kind of privacy issue. I think the applicants have a right to build a feature like this. I think that it can conform with the building code, and the final plan check will review that. Like Chris, I think it's pretty much a landscaping question. And I'm reminded that I've had the very same problem, or very, very similar problem, in myself in my own house. So we've solved it with landscape plantings. The trees take a couple of years to grow, but they've been successful at that. Chris can recommend some plants because he's a landscape architect. The plant that our architect used was Prunus carolinus, which is an evergreen tree. It doesn't lose its leaves in the winter and provides really good screening. And right now they're well over 20 feet tall, but they've been there for a number of years. Another neighbor cut down a major tree in their backyard last year, and it really opened up our views, which look right at the high school. So I just went out and bought 2 more of those trees, and in a couple of years, I'm hoping that will solve the problem, and that our view of the high school will be obliterated, and more or less, and that our backyard will be green. So I do think that is the way to mitigate this issue, and that I think the applicant has a right to build this, and I don't really have any design problems with it, and could approve it.
Commissioner Jennings?
Yeah, I generally agree with Commissioner Donaldson's comments. The one thing I would add is that, you know, it did strike me that the posts for the sunshade, those seem to be the one thing that you would be able to see from the street. And I don't think it's a big deal, but if there's going to be a large, you know, portions of the year when you're either not using the deck or you don't have the sunshade up because, you know, you don't need it. It does strike me whether that's really a necessary part of the design. I don't feel strongly enough about it to say we should, you know, require getting rid of it, but I think it's something to think about. Although you know, one of the commenters suggested just using umbrellas instead, and I agree that would be a good practical resolution. Although I'm not really sure that aesthetically that if the neighbors would prefer that. But at any rate, I think this is something that's within the homeowner's rights, and you know, knowing that there are other owners in the, you know, immediate proximity who already have second story portions of their homes that may be overlooking this yard. I don't know why this owner should be told that they can't have a second story use that allows them to, you know, to optimize the use of their yard a little better. So I'm okay with it.
Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said already by our fellow commissioners. They have the right, they could build a second story, which would block light and views even to a much greater extent. I think this is fairly modest. I think privacy concerns kind of work them out over time. You know, I think planting is a viable solution on one side of the fence or the other. I really don't have any problem with this as a design or as a build out. I guess the only thing I would want to require would be if there are any fixed electrical light fixtures, that they're shielded from the neighbors if they're high enough up high. You know, some sort of fixed shield that would just cast light down and not into the backyard of the other neighbors. That would be about it. I have no problem with the sunshade. I think it's kind of artistic, kind of creative solution. It looks like something that would be retractable or slid to one side. I think that's the intention. You know, and as far as noise, you know, we've had neighbor kids and they've made noise and eventually they grow up and move on. And, you know, so it's, we all have to give a little bit in that respect, but you know, all right. Otherwise, yeah, I have no problem with this project as is.
Great. Well, I'll just chime in. I echo the comments made by fellow commissioners. In fact, I mean, I honestly would be completely fine with roof decks on one-story additions not being forwarded onto the Planning Commission. I think it's well within the zoning parameters. And, you know, I think for me, part of the you know, Albany Municipal Code is about adapting homes for modern living. And, you know, looking at this home, actually, I've got it in Google Street View right now. The entire backyard is shaded and that portion of the roof is entirely in sun. And so I completely understand the desire to have this as a deck. I think outdoor living is something that's equally, you know, important in many regards as to interior you know, living environment, and especially since we're all stuck in our homes right now, I think there's even an increased need for being able to have spaces outside that are enjoyable for your family to live. You know, for me, when it comes to privacy issues, I think the thing that is really important to me is everyone has different thresholds for what privacy means to them and what privacy impacts on them are. And I think it's really hard to regulate through zoning controls privacy impacts. To me, that's something that every property owner needs to take into their own hands and adapt their property to what their privacy tolerances are. In the same way that Commissioner Donaldson, you know, had impacts on the surrounding environment and he solved his own problem on his property and bringing in the privacy that he needed. And to me, that's really the solution. Folks have a right to develop their property within the zoning controls. If it's not desirable for adjacent property owners for privacy concerns, then to me, I think that's something that, certainly try working with your neighbors. If you can come up, neighborly approach is always the best. But I think at the end of the day, you can certainly, as a adjacent property owner, put up hedges and plants along your property line just the same and get it just the way you want it. So all in all, I think this is perfectly fine. I have absolutely no problem with this proposal and would certainly be in support if somebody would like to make a motion on this item. Commissioner Donaldson?
Yeah, first I have two other comments or questions. Commissioner McLeod raised the question of the lighting, and I had a note to do that too. I think that's a good question. I believe, Christopher, and that there is a standard condition in the staff report about down aimed light. All the lighting has to be aimed down. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Downward.
Yep.
Okay.
We require that they be shielded in down tilt so that they illuminate only the immediate space and
So
not
that
have
should be
spillover.
covered. That concern should be covered with our standard conditions. And my other thing is, Christopher, maybe for the record, you can tell everybody what your two favorite plants are for shielding here. I'm gonna take notes.
I think that was a great one. The Prunus Carolina is a really good one, but I was thinking of Podosperm eugenioides, which might be a little bit tall, or the Podosperm tawiwi, which would eventually get around 12 feet, 15 feet. The one more thing I didn't mention was those planters on the deck. I think that's way too much weight. Those things are really heavy if they're as big as they're shown, if they're full of soil. But if they're just a decorative planter with kind of a fake interior, that's different. So I'm not sure if that's a realistic vision for the planter screening on top of that deck. And yeah, I think any one of those three plants will work.
Should I make a motion? I'll move approval of planning application 20029, design review for a new roof deck at 511 Carmel.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, with that second, I'll call roll call vote then. Commissioner Kent?
Yes.
Commissioner McLeod?
Aye.
Commissioner Jennings?
Aye.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So that item is approved with a vote of 5-0. And similarly, that project does have the 14-day appeal period. And with that closes our agenda item number 6 for action items. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is new business. It appears there is none. And item 8 on the agenda, announcement communication, item 8-1, building permit and planning application activity. Staff, did you have a?
Yeah, just a kind of a quick check-in for the commission's benefit, really. We've been tracking internally both the permit issuance and the planning application filings with obviously COVID going on. And the thing that really strikes us is that we're down, but not by much. So that's a really good indicator that Albany residents are still feeling comfortable about investing in their properties. And just to give you a few data points, in March of this year, we actually surpassed our March issuance of 2019. We issued 54 permits during the month compared to 47 the previous year. It obviously fell off in April with the construction restrictions, but it picked up again in May. And we've stayed pretty consistent around 48 to 60 permits being issued per month. And right now, as of today, we've issued 37 permits for the month of September. So we seem to have a steady flow of permits and a lot of construction going on. Our inspector's in 3 days a week. And so he has full inspection loads each of those days. So it's good that under the current circumstances, there continues to be reinvestment in the housing stock. As a corollary to that, with the modified work accommodations that we have, we've been shifting our permit issuance and more recently our plan check to going entirely digital. So these are changes that obviously we did in response to COVID, and we're finding out that it works really well. We're going to continue with this well into the future. We initiated the electronic plan check process just about a month ago. So we're still working out some of the bumps in the road with that, but otherwise it's saving paper, it's saving shipping costs, and it's saving time for the applicants. So we're really excited about that.
And quick question on that. Can I ask you what, two questions. One, what are sort of the in-person services, if any? Like, are the city doors open if somebody were to drop off a paper plan, or are you guys fully remote?
So I'm in here actually every day. I'm still coming in Monday through Friday. Up until our implementation of electronic plan check, we were still doing arranged drop-offs for applicants, and it was working reasonably well. But between the shipping from here to our plan checker's office in Santa Rosa, collecting paper, arranging all of the pickup drop-off, it was adding a lot of time and expense, I think it was really, we're overdue to do a change. So we're doing now everything through Dropbox and Adobe PDF. Chris has designed stamps for our department to use, electronic stamps on the plan check. So it seems to be working out well so far.
And is it just, is the markup tool, you're just using the Adobe functionality right now for your markup tool?
Yeah, so I know San Francisco, as an example, uses Bluebeam. That's something that I think we would be looking to use potentially in the future. Right now, we have an amended budget for the year, which means we're not actually able to spend money on software. So for the time being, we're just using the tools that we have with Dropbox and Adobe to keep the process moving.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, in my business, we've been doing electronic submittals for quite a while with other jurisdictions. And yeah, once you figure it out, it's much smoother, less hassle with printing. I think we should just stay that way. I think it's much better. And then just my other question would be, how are you doing with permit processing? Because in some of the other cities I'm dealing with, it's really slow. I mean, are we keeping up? How are we doing?
Oh no, we're keeping up, and maybe this may be a bit unorthodox for me to divulge this, but this is part of what's driving some of this. So I'm doing remodel work on my own residence, and it took me 3 months to get a kitchen remodel permit, and we're not talking about anything major. We're talking about cabinets and countertops and surfaces. And that is not what we want to do. I mean, that's a permit that under ordinary circumstances would be processed in a matter of days. And so just as I'm referring to that as my PTSD, we're trying to obviously do a lot better than that here in Albany. The over-the-counter stuff gets processed very quickly. That's the re-roofs, the water heaters, furnaces, that type of thing. We can do that all same day. Bathroom, kitchen remodels takes a couple of days. And then of course, someone doing a second-story addition, that's going to take probably about 6 to 8 weeks, just depending on the project complexity and the engineering required and that sort of thing.
That's great. Yeah, glad to hear.
Yeah, congrats for getting up and running.
Divulge
my day job challenges.
Yeah, no, so far so good. The other thing I was going to mention also is that our planning application load, we've had what, 3 or 4 applications filed just from last Friday to now. So again, another indicator that people are comfortable investing in their homes, and obviously see this as a long-term investment. So we are down overall compared to 2019, but we're still seeing activity, which is great.
Great. If no other questions, why don't we move on to item 8-2, hearing rescheduling?
Yes, so in the month of November, we have a little bit of a scheduling issue. If we were to have the first meeting of the month, it would be on Veterans Day, and we're obviously closed. The second meeting of the month would be the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so that's obviously a non-starter. And our December meetings would fall right around Christmas. So we were thinking of combining the November and December meetings and scheduling that for Wednesday, December 2nd, if that works for the commission.
December 2nd?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Works for me.
Great.
It should be fine. Yeah.
Okay.
And I imagine we'll still be doing Zoom, and we'll get a new Zoom invite.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Anyone else? Okay. With that, we will move on to our next agenda item then. Item 9, next meeting is in about a month, October 28th. Same. And will that hearing also have a special session, or will that start at 7?
That one will start at 7.
Okay, so great. October 28th at 7 p.m. And with that, our meeting for tonight is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Good night.